This is a business plan that students put together. And the challenge here was they took the first blockchain course that Jose and I taught at Johns Hopkins, and they wanted to apply their knowledge in practice. And so Jose, through his network, he has a tremendous network, found a particular interesting case study for us the students to analyze. And basically, Meharry Medical College is a medical college that was started in 1876. 1876, and the purpose of that college was to educate slaves in the medical profession so they can have jobs and opportunities. So Meharry has this rig, an 18-wheeler rig, and it has 5 beds on it. And they take this rig and they drive around the remote parts of Tennessee, and they provide health care for sort of the underprivileged Tennessee in order to provide services. Now, what's so interesting about this is it's a combination of industry. These were our industry partners that the students had a chance to have a conversation with. It's a combination of thinking about what is a business model, how do we sustain this? And we had so much excitement. We have so much coverage inside Meharry, from the deans to the doctors to everybody on the administrative staff. They wanted to do something really great and extend this service furthermore using blockchain technology. And so what the students came up with, and this is their proposal, and this is how they generated that 454% ROI. They said, currently the way it works is the process is that a student doctor takes information down, and then after they get off the rig, they sort of manually input it into a system. So it takes about 15 minutes per patient, per visit. And so whenever you can improve the process in terms of reducing the time, that is a boom in ROI. Because what that does is it allows the student doctors to spend their time seeing more patients, all right? So the first innovation was, let's save time for these doctors on these rigs, student doctors on these rigs, in order so that they can see more patients and they can increase the amount of patients that they can see and thus drive the revenues. The second innovation is, so that was one of it. Okay, so this is the chart. And this is a very nice chart because basically on the y-axis is millions of dollars. Here's the 0 line right here. And on the x-axis is time. Okay? As I mentioned before, this business of bringing healthcare on a rig is not very profitable. So traditionally, this line here, this is the net income, is always negative. See, the gray line is always negative, right? And so people have tried to do this, other organizations have tried to do this, and what happens is that they go out there and they try to receive grant funding because they have to cover this negative net income, right? So this is an unsustainable business. However, the students came up with an idea how to make it sustainable. And saving the 15 minutes per patient per student doctors is not enough. Then they thought to themselves, well, with blockchains, what can we do? We can, exactly what Oki said, share the data. Okay, what does that mean, share the data? That means you can sit there and put a node inside Meharry, and you could even put a node inside Johns Hopkins. And now you can take data, or information from the edge of the network. Remember, this rig goes inside and provides dental services, right? At the point of care, bring that information up onto the blockchain. So then you'll see that if you do that, I'm sorry, go to the next slide real quick. Here's Johns Hopkins, here's Meharry. They're sharing data, okay? What does that mean to share data? Someone mentioned before, is it going to be HIPAA compliant? These two organizations are world class. They're going to lay down a governance structure and rules of engagement that will be completely compliant to HIPAA, completely compliant in terms of the security, right? And what do we do in the ivory tower? We lay down best practices. So we would lay down the best practices here, share the best practices with Meharry. Meharry probably has some really good best practices that Johns Hopkins can also learn about and understand. And so the idea is that once we set this up, and the students went out to ACT, IACT, and had a wonderful time presenting this, which was great, it was very well received, we started to get more interest from other places, right? So you can imagine if we set this up, and now we've sort of figured out how to make everything HIPAA compliant, and we're sharing information across the two organizations, Meharry and Johns Hopkins. We can learn how to provide optimal dental sort of care on a mobile unit. And Hopkins has, and I haven't found it yet, but inside Hopkins they have another rig that goes around in Baltimore and provides some basic blood testing. So you can imagine we could take some of that expertise in that network, bring it across the network, and share it with Meharry. And so if you think about it a little bit more, you can like literally create, a hospital, a mobile hospital that's taking best practices from the best institutions in the world and reinventing healthcare, how it's delivered. Obviously, if it's a serious surgery or whatever it may be, or life-threatening, you wouldn't go to this mobile unit. But if it's something to do with your teeth, maybe you need an x-ray, maybe you need a blood test, or something that's not life-threatening, then you can imagine this network growing. And so they sort of envisioned other high-caliber organizations joining, sharing the expertise, which is ultimately healthcare, right? Best practices in healthcare, and providing the service and hopefully reducing costs and getting to the patients what they need. So that's an example of how you do ROI. This is the students actually presenting just about 2 weeks ago, right? And it was very well received. And if you want a copy of the PowerPoint that they have or the business plan, that's all. We'll give it to you guys, whatever you want, whatever you need, okay? Coverage is very important. I cannot stress how important this is. I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins Business School. I have access to the smartest students, can build any kind of technology, whatever you want, okay? But without coverage, we do nothing. We do nothing, okay? So this is the coverage that is important. These are the guys, Michael Curtis, Jose, Oki, Michael, and Saatchi is starting to sort of become one of these people who are very influential inside the government that will provide this coverage because they believe in the blockchain. They want to use this technology. And so one thing to think about, and where are we in the scope of the world right now when it comes to blockchains? Okay. So how many people remember when they sent their first email? You remember? Hello, my friend. Off to the internet. And what happened? What happened? Did you get an instantaneously response and was Google ready to go to fire up to search everything and you buy everything with one click on Amazon? No. What was there? First there's this thing called AOL. Did it survive? Well, unfortunately not. Then there was this thing called Yahoo. Did it survive? Well, kind of, right? I love Yahoo Finance and I wish they could stop changing their side. But the ultimate winners were Google and Amazon and Facebook, right? We are at that stage right now where we can send a little bit of digital value to our friend, okay? Nobody knows who's going to win this space. Will there be a winner? Yes, probably multiple of them. Will they dominate the space and dethrone Amazon and Google? Probably. Do we know who it's going to be? No. It's impossible. I don't care what you say to me, oh, I'm going to be the next Google and all this stuff. Okay, we will see because it takes a lot more than just, chutzpah to build a business, right? It takes a lot of, courage and, but the potential is absolutely there. So what Oki said is absolutely correct, right? But we are at that first inning where we're sending digital value. Okay, so if you have your coverage, you have your ROI because you thought about the business problem that you're going to solve, next thing you need to do is show tangible results. You need to show results quickly. And this is one way I think that you would be able to show results, and this is the path that we've taken. We think about Pele. Who's Pele?
Brazilian footballer.
Yeah, but do you remember his number on the back of his? Nobody remembers Pele's number. In this timeout, we're going to have to take up. Pele was number 10, right? So when you say I got a 10-time multiplier for your revenues, I can reduce your cost by 1/10, you automatically get the notice of everybody that's in the room. So how do you unleash the Pele multiplier? And this is what we're talking about. This is why there's so much potential here. Okay, go to the next slide. The Pele multiplier has to do with the following. You need blockchains, but you also need AI. And the way it works is that every organization, including the government, including Johns Hopkins, including a lot of corporations, there's these folks. And they're people, I call them data fiefdoms. I'm in the IRS. I don't want to share the data with the Social Security Administration that doesn't want to share the data with HHS or NIH or CDC. They're data fiefdoms, right? So what we're going to do here, and this is taking a note right out, if you just build your AI on top of your data fiefdom, you can only get so far. Okay, you can't really do much, and this is what everyone's doing, right? But this is what the blockchain does. It says, hey, let me take your data up to the blockchain data layer. Now we're sharing data. Remember Meharry and Johns Hopkins sharing data. If we can sign up the Mayo Clinic, then we'll be all sharing data, right? That is powerful. And people are like, well, how do you know it's powerful? Oh, yeah, that sounds good, but how do you know it's powerful? Because my whole career, all I did was take data here in the finance industry, reach across to the Twitter or social media industry, combine them, explosive results, publish a paper, take data in the finance industry, this is what I did in graduate school, here's macroeconomics, share them, put them together. So basically it's very powerful because if people are not looking there, there's something really interesting. And that's what's happening. So then once you share the data up to the blockchain data layer and you're sharing down, then you build your microservices, the AI microservices on top. Now these microservices, by the way, keep changing. How do they keep changing? Like a few years ago, it was support vector machine, then it was random forest, then it's XGBoost, then it's AutoML. One of the microservices here is so scary, OpenAI doesn't want to release it. Are you aware of this? The ability to generate more news trained on the way someone has sort of written in the past. I could take Abraham Lincoln's speeches, I could train my algorithm, and now I could have Abraham Lincoln, should we go for or should we go against Trump? We could go either way. And we could generate a bunch of articles that are going to be very sort of educated in terms of how they're making arguments. But OpenAI, whose mission is to democratize AI so nobody gets too powerful, created this algorithm and they're still holding it back because they don't know what the implications are. That's just the new AI on top of this chain. Okay? The interesting thing here is that in your lifetime, more likely than not, don't get shocked, you will see the singularity. And what is the singularity? Does anybody know what this, we better know about this stuff because you're going to see it in your lifetime. What is it? Huh? Singularity, remember the word.
Consciousness.
It's where an AI becomes as smart and surpasses human intelligence.
Self-awareness. Yeah.
We will see. Now, will we lose to the singularity? Will we lose to this AI, this Terminator thing? The answer is, it depends. What is the objective that this thing is trying to optimize? People are saying the objective should be allowing human beings to always have freedom. And if that's the objective, then they're never going to suppress our freedom, right? But if the objective is to dominate the world, then that's what they're going to be optimizing, right? So this is a really interesting time, and I encourage everyone to get involved and learn about this. Basically, we're going to see it right before our own eyes. And I want you guys to get involved. I want you to understand and sort of struggle with the moral implications, and talk to people about it, educate yourself about it. This is, right? It's going to happen. It's not like 200 years later. No, it's happening. It's happening, right? So with that said, let me go. Let's see here. Here are some sort of results on the stuff that we've done, and we've had a wonderful time working with our federal partners on this. And I encourage everyone to continue to pursue machine learning, AI technologies, and blockchains, because at the end of the day, we're improving government, and that's definitely happening. And we're driving down, making government more efficient. And I would go so far as saying, if we have a lot of guys like Oki and Jose and Michael and so forth across the government, we can make the U.S. government the most technologically savvy government in the world, right? We have arguably the best military. Why can't we have the best internal processes inside the government, right? To sort of process transactions or whatever it may be. So with that, I'll open up for just 1 or 2 questions and I'll stop. You guys have any questions? Was it too shocking? You didn't expect to hear the singularity this morning, did you?
Have you looked into the Russia 2045 project at all, and some of the advances that they're trying to make along this way of getting us towards the singularity faster? And how do you feel about some of the other nations and other people doing work with it?
Make no doubt, there is an AI race going on right now. All right, it will only perpetuate probably the singularity. And there's a few countries that are running really fast in this race, throwing a lot of resources, right? My bet is, if we go all the way to the singularity, we all call each other and we say, hey, if we don't work together, we're all going to get wiped out. So it's kind of like a Hollywood movie, you know, the presidents of the different countries are saying, hey, you know, who's your smartest AI person? There's a rogue AI over here that we can't control. We need help. So I think we're going to band together as, you know, as just human beings, and we'll be able to fight it off. The other thing I'm going to throw in there, and I'm not going to sort of talk about it, is there is development in research for the human and computer interface. Right? And so if you ask one hedge fund manager, Paul Tudor Jones, very famous, he says that he thinks that a machine can beat a man or a woman, but a man or a woman and a machine can beat a machine. So if we sort of combine with a machine, then we'll be able to defeat this sort of rogue machine. Any other questions? Is it exciting? Is it fun? Don't be scared. We got it. Yes.
I might have one more. How close do you think we are to like the neural net or the neural mesh with kind of combining into that way that we could assimilate with the AI, kind of to what you were talking about?
So at APL, Johns Hopkins APL, they have successfully allowed a woman to just put some sort of nodes inside her, you know, they open up her skull and put it on her brain, and she can grab a piece of chocolate and feed her, like a robotic arm can feed it to her, right? Which makes it pretty interesting, right? She doesn't have any arms. But they've also done the other, where they allow a robotic arm to pick up something and transmit, oh, this is heavy, and you know, this is not as heavy, back to the brain, right? So we've gone both ways. We just have to make it, you know, we just have to continue to push on that technology. But our brain is interacting, right? You know, with objects outside of our bodies, right? So we'll see what's happening, but it's very exciting. And you know, I encourage you guys not to be afraid. Just, you know, learn about it, think about it. You know, definitely try to pursue, make sure that we get the optimization correct, right, for this stuff. And you know, do we have the technology to blow ourselves off the face of the earth so many times? Yes or no? Well, of course, we already have. Do we do that? No. So, you know, are we going to be able to put some, you know, checks and balances on this AI? I think that ultimately we'll band together and that will happen, and we'll put best practices in place, right? So I'm not so worried, but I'm very excited about this technology. Okay? Any other questions? Yes?
Not a question, more of a comment and observation. Just what you were talking about with taking the different branches of government and uploading them to the blockchain. It kind of just jogged a thought of mine that kind of reminds me of DNA and the way that it was encoded. And you have the entire, you know, biological, you know, from the first cell all the way to today, and then you get humans,
yes,
where you have the genealogy of all that going all the way back forth. And, you know, it almost seems quite similar to where AI and blockchain would kind of be the DNA would be blockchain, and then AI would be the next step.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a very, very thoughtful, interesting way to put it, right? Some of the things that are occurring now is that for some of the blockchains, they're permissionless, so anyone can join, okay? The only use case right now that anyone can join the blockchain that works is sort of Bitcoins and arguably Ethereum, but you could argue Ethereum doesn't really work because there's not really any successful startups on top of it, right? Beyond that, most of the other blockchains are permissioned, right? So if you look at Ripple, for example, that's permissioned. The blockchains in the government right now are permissioned blockchains, right? And so there is going to be a huge opportunity for someone to figure out how to use this permissionless blockchains beyond Bitcoins, okay? And so, you know, will the blockchain be the fundamental technology? It looks like it will be. What are people going to do on top of that? We're not sure. It's open up to, you know, people being creative. Will the innovation occur in Silicon Valley versus some third world country? We don't know. It could come in a third world country, right? So this is what's so great about the internet. But I want to address one last thing if I have a chance. And this is one of the professors, I don't know if you've seen this, Rubini, Professor Rubini at NYU, he says blockchain is no better than an Excel spreadsheet and email. Right, have you heard that? No better than an Excel spreadsheet and an email. If there's two counterparties, he's probably correct, because I update an email, I send it to my friend gets it, sends it back to me, updates a row, sends it back to me, and we go back and forth, right? And so we kind of know who has the last copy of this spreadsheet through this email, because there's only two people. Now, Imagine every one of us is part of the network, and I have this spreadsheet. I send it to all you guys to update it. You get it, you update it, and you send it to everybody else. But one of you forgets the email address to type it completely because it's a human error. Now somebody in our network doesn't have the right, quote, ledger. This person is going to be running around everywhere saying, hey, do I have the right ledger? I'm not sure. Right? So it breaks down very quickly. Right? So what is blockchain doing? It is having the efficiency gain whereby human error and human reconciliation of data is taken out of the picture. There's so much money spent trying to reconcile data because a human being made the error. And you just have to look at Wall Street, look at all the mid-office, back-office reconciliation departments. Basically, a human made a trade with another human, and somebody put in an error. And now somebody has to go back and reconcile that trade. Another human being has to call another human being to reconcile that error, right? And so blockchain, there's no more error. Everyone has the same ledger, we agree, right? If you don't know what's going on, just look at the data on your blockchain, right? And we won't have to sort of worry so much about reconciling human error in the blockchain data space, okay? So, I mean, I covered a lot of ground, and we're going to have a really nice discussion because we have some of the top blockchain sort of specialists here, and we'll really sort of decompose how the blockchain works together, how the hashing works together, how to put data onto the blockchain, and so on, right? So, but let's hold that until the panel discussion, or it's going to get too technical, I think, right? But I'm happy to answer any questions, and if you guys have any interesting problems that you need help with, please do let me know. Okay? Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, no problem.
I think I've seen you on. No, I see you on TED Talks. Is that true? Did you sign out?
Good day, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm from a third world country called New Jersey. And it is my pleasure to be here. Just a little background, just in case we need introductions. I've always been at the intersection of academia and enterprise. So I'm a son of 2 college professors. I never wanted to do what my parents did. That didn't work out well. I've built 2 startups. This is my 3rd, and I've operated in multiple Fortune 500 companies. Specific to blockchain, I have a unique perspective and approach relevant to thinking about how paradigms move. And what I'd like to share with you today is a perspective on how paradigms move and how blockchain might move. I'm sure we can get into all of the technicalities on the panel. I am a geek. I still code. I still have GitHub accounts and all sorts of interesting things that I do. But at the same time, I operate P&Ls as well, so I'm able to straddle that. And currently, I teach a blockchain management class at Syracuse University, which is a very long drive from a third world country called New Jersey. So with that, I wanted to share with you how the current corporate asset that I have in the private sector is using blockchain to add a property ownership right on human data, and why this is important, and why this topic might inspire you to think about how else you might use blockchain. I will make you slightly uncomfortable, but I promise you that at the end I will bring you back to a very, very peaceful place. Don't worry. So if you think about how paradigms move, it's important to recognize, and this is hindsight, when you think about paradigms, for example, the internet, there's usually a set of 0 to 1 inventions on the bottom. And by 0 to 1, I mean things that are invented for the first time. And then what happens is, there's usually some sort of go-to-market that makes that 0 to 1 invention very popular. And then the VCs go crazy. And they fund every single copycat of that 0 to 1 invention that you could ever think of. And then a lot of money's lost, and there's a bust in the paradigm. and then a new 0 to 1 invention appears. And there's a massive amount of entrepreneurial activity in capitalism, and then that busts, and then it appears again. Now, if you think about the internet, and I think both of the speakers before sort of mentioned the evolution of the internet paradigm, the first thing that really happened was real-time text exchange. Do you know what the first character that was sent over the ARPANET network was? A smiley face, which is kind of true to the human species, right? Right. And this was made popular by AOL Chat. Yes, for the geeks like myself who needed email, but for the masses, it was AOL Chat that kind of created this sort of popularization of the pattern. And then at one point, there were 2,000 chat applications VC funded in the world. I know that's startling to believe, but they were all AOL Chat killers. Okay? And there was a bust, and then there was the transfer of money that was invented on the internet, which is to transfer payment. I don't know if anybody here remembers Authorize.net. If you do, you're probably my age. But Authorize.net is the one who made this popular. At one point on a website, you needed a little logo on the bottom to show that you are not going to steal people's money on a credit card account. HTTPS was not important. That was Authorize.net. They're now owned by Visa. But they sort of made that popular. Everyone had a shopping cart at that point, and then you saw the Pets.com bubble because everyone had everything.com, right? Pancakes.com, Pets.com, you imagine it. And then there was a bit of a bust there, and this coincided with a financial market bust, and then eventually streaming media. Now, I don't have a really good example of who made streaming media popular, so I'm using YouTube here. But this was VoIP, this was fast download of images, this was video upload, download, in real time. Now, if you look at your phones today, and you remove the hardware components, so take the GPS sensor off, take the camera off, take the microphone off, take the light of the screen, 80% of what is on any single mobile phone today is some combination of these three unique inventions. Real-time text exchange, payments, and streaming media. Just let that set in for a second. So when you think about paradigms, and hindsight is obviously 2020, there's a pattern by which paradigms move. And if you can read the patterns, you can usually read paradigms. Now, electricity moved the same way. The steam engine moved exactly the same way. The printing press moved the same way as well. Now, in hindsight, what you get is you get the opportunity to filtrate it down to its most basic, rudimentary capability. And if you think about the internet, now that we have had 20, 30 years of it, we can do this. It's like, oh, of course, it removed distance from every transaction. I don't think there was anyone in 1994 that thought about the internet that way. Okay? It takes distance out of any transaction. And so if we knew that, we would have probably all here been ruling the world in some way, or helping the world in some way, depending on which side of the person on the shoulder you want to talk to, right? Because there's also a good guy and a bad guy, right? On either side of the shoulder. So if we can find this for blockchain, we might be able to unlock use cases of blockchain. My hypothesis, which comes from a perspective of history and an application of futuristic experimentation, is that blockchain will help us add agreements to every network. That's the look I want, by the way. I saw everyone's face change. This is me, 1994, on stage. All you had was AOL Chat. And I'm telling you, in 1994, that the internet would compress distance from every transaction. You would have given me this exact look that you just gave me. I'm telling you that my perspective, I'm not saying I'm right, my perspective is that blockchain adds agreements to networks. Now let's unpack that for a second. Blockchain will probably be won by a killer agreement, not a killer app like the internet. So agreements. We are terrible at agreeing as a species. It's actually one of our manufactured flaws. If I asked this room, and it's probably what, 40, 50 people in the room, with this high IQ, to agree on the top 3 movies that everyone believes are the best movies in the world, you guys would go at it for about 6 hours. Okay? We are terrible at agreeing. We really can't agree on just about anything. There are still parts of the world that don't agree that taking someone's life is morally wrong. we're really not that good at agreeing. So how did we agree over time? How did we civilize? Because agreement is the fundamental capability of civilization. Well, we started off with absolutely no agreement, which led to disorderly behavior as a species. Which means, sir, if you had a cave, assuming that you and I were around a couple thousand years ago, I could walk in your cave, take all your banana, steal your family, walk away, no agreement on whether that's right or wrong. Okay? Maybe I just take a banana. I'll leave it. Okay? But we had to build agreements to civilize. And so what we did was we created pools of power. Pools of power are bodies of individuals that hold our agreement and then tell us what we agree on. Democracy. Now, parenting is actually a really interesting pool of power as well. I just happened to become a parent 14 months ago. It's fascinating how much power I have over my 14-month-old, right? Many churches, notice I didn't say all, are interesting pools of power to tell us how to behave. Governments are an interesting pool of power. The Federal Reserve is an interesting pool of power. They tell us what the price of the currency is, how many there should be out there, how many should be burnt or minted, and who should have it and how it should work. Pools of power, and that's how we civilized. Now, we live in a world of centralized agreement where behavior is enforced. I know it doesn't feel that way because we were boiled like a frog. And it's good, by the way. We would probably still be stealing bananas from each other if we didn't create centralized pools of power. What blockchain represents is experimentation for us to go after hypotheses where we could take something that was potentially over-centralized or unnecessarily centralized and test to see if we can decentralize that agreement by everybody agreeing on what it is. This is the social pattern. We'll talk about the technical implementations in a second. Bitcoin is a massive experiment that said if enough of us agree on what the price of the coin is, what the transactional history is of each of the coin, and what the balance is of everyone's wallet, we can have a pretty substantial currency, and we can look at the feds or any other currency holder in any country and say, I know you got your thing over there, and that's great, but we have our thing over here, and it's awesome. Decentralized agreements. Now, decentralization is kind of cool. Self-ordering, pain in the butt. And this is why you see a lot of the fraud that's happening in cryptocurrency. Because inherently, everybody has one person on this shoulder and one person on the other shoulder. And some people listen to the other shoulder. Okay? So we have a technology in front of us that can help us either take agreements that are too centralized and experiment with decentralization, or take things where we don't have agreement at all and experiment to see if we can build agreement around it. This is why the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the Aspen Institute, and every single government in the world that's paying attention is excited about the power of blockchain. There are transactional use cases that, yes, are optimizing some of the technology that we have, but there's a social restructuring that could come out with this particular technology. And the reason why it's capable of doing that is because the barrier to entry, or the cost that's needed to build technological systems that has hundreds of millions of heterogeneous nodes and make sure that that data is immutable, meaning it cannot be finagled with, which is a massively scientific word, finagle, right? And to make sure that all of those nodes, by design, can keep in consensus with each other in the absence of the fundamental combination of asymmetric cryptography and distributed ledgers of blockchain, that would be a $100 billion problem to solve for. Here, it's cheaper and more reliable. So, with that pattern in mind, you can see how I might be able to arrive at a conclusion or a hypothesis that says blockchain helps us build agreements to networks. Now, the first sort of agreement that was built on blockchain, and you guys recognize this chart, right? This is the same chart of the internet chart, right? Everybody still tracking? Okay. I'm just testing to see who's falling asleep. Right? So, and what I like to do with my students is if I see somebody nodding off, if I know their name, that's the person I call on to ask a question. So the first use case was to agree on what something is. And most of that was pointed as what's the price of a coin, what's the transactional history of the coin, and what's the balance of everyone's wallet. Made popular by Bitcoin, and boom! Dogecoin, Crapcoin, Catcoin, every other coin you can ever imagine. And I'm not saying that there's not going to be a cryptographically based currency in the world. I mean, after all, everyone is still running AOL chat. Whether you have WhatsApp, iMessage, or WeChat, you're still running a pattern of AOL chat, right? What I am saying is that there are going to be other 0-to-1 inventions on the blockchain. Now here's some of what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people use blockchain to agree on who someone is. Identity and reputation. Identity and reputation are two separate things. There's a lot of work around self-sovereign identity. I have no interest in sovereign. I'm just stating them there. I'm sort of projecting forward saying they might be the winner. To your point earlier, who knows who the winner is going to be? But identity is massively, massively broken. And here's an opportunity to use this at low cost, low infrastructure overhead to set up identity. Reputation is in complete disarray. I happen to own a restaurant as a hobby investment. I figured out the other day, I don't really manage the restaurant, I just have it because like that's how you become important in a town. Like the mayor knows you, the chief of police knows you because everybody wants a discount, right? Or the room, for their holiday party in the back. I don't really look at the restaurant, I look at my Yelp reviews. That's how I manage the restaurant. When I see a good Yelp review, I send the manager a text. When I see a bad Yelp review, I send the manager a text. So I saw a really bad review in my restaurant about a year and a half ago. It's a Cuban restaurant. It has this thing called a Camarones Verdes, which is 5 jumbo shrimp with all sorts of peppers inside of it. 1-star review on the restaurant. Went to the restaurant, great ambiance, beautiful food, everything was fantastic, but I got 4 shrimp instead of 5. 1-star review. Now, a 1-star review on Yelp is bad, because when people hit your restaurants on Yelp, they look at the first one only, right? So I figured, I'm going to call this person, I'm going to negotiate. Right? Come on, I could talk to this person, give them 2 free meals, they'll change it to a 3-star, I'll be fine, right? Clicked on the profile, cat lover 271, picture of a cat. Only wrote negative reviews for a whole bunch of other restaurants in the area. Did some research of my own. Turns out 33% of reviews on Yelp are fake because restaurant owners will pay these people to write bad reviews on other people's restaurants. And by the way, restaurant owners can pay people to write good reviews on their own restaurants. Reputation is in complete peril. There's a website on the internet with a massive amount of lies right now. I'll conduct an experiment for you guys. What's the website on the internet with the most lies?
Name the news network.
Wikipedia?
Wikipedia, Name the News Network.
Name the news?
Facebook?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the website on the internet with the most lies. We are genetically engineered to overstate our capabilities in our resumes. So let that sit in for a second. And by the way, everybody's thumbsing up everybody else's skills like crazy. So they're becoming truths. So this is a big invention. The other is how things might work. Full disclosure, I founded a company called Humanity.co. Who knows whether they'll be in that bucket or not? I'm using them as an example. Okay? So how things work. Well, let's take a problem that we're tackling. How should HIPAA be interpreted? I know there was a lot of conversation here around HIPAA earlier. One of the issues with democracy is that we elect the people that we want. That's not the issue. Those people get to the top and they are supposed to put together regulations for us. That's not the issue either. Those regulations come down and they come down very wide. Okay? You can look at a regulation and you can pay one lawyer. Ma'am, let's say you're a lawyer. If I'm a consumer and I pay you, you'll see a giraffe on one side of HIPAA. And if a corporation pays you on the other side of HIPAA, you'll see a Tesla. That's the issue with regulations. Corporations can interpret a business-centric view of a regulation, while consumers might interpret a consumer-centric view of regulation. The problem we're tackling with blockchain is who owns human data. Now, everybody says, and I think you said it, sir, and I think the presenter before you said it, the consumer owns human data. But what does ownership mean? Like, ownership needs to be clarified. From a legal perspective, from a financial perspective, it needs to be clarified. Like, what does it mean to own the data? Is it your intellectual property? Is it your personal property? I still wonder how I'm going to explain to my son that I own him. That was supposed to be a joke. Okay. So, agreements to networks. We don't have an agreement on who owns human data. Because if you ask the doctor will tell you they own it. If you ask the hospital will tell you they own it. If you ask the data brokers in the middle, the data brokers will say, heck, we definitely own it. If you ask pharma, they'll tell you, we bought it and we owned it. And if you ask the patient, they say, man, I don't even know, but I just want access to it. Ownership is in massive disagreement around human data. So, I believe that we have the Goldilocks conditions of history to play out a pattern that played out 2 times before in human history, and we can play it out with the help of blockchain. Blockchain will not be the solution, but it will be the help. How many people here realize that they are a two-income species? You're a member of a 2-income species. I'll unpack that for you for a second. Humans have 2 forms of primary income. You have secondary income, like real estate is secondary income. But primary income, intellectual property and labor. Like you really can't get paid for anything else that is innate from you. I encourage you to remember my opening remarks. I'm a child of 2 history professors. Okay? So, before 1623, if you wrote a book, it was not yours. Just wasn't yours. If you draw a piece of art, it wasn't yours. Then we had the Statute of Monopolies in 1623, which was introduced in Britain. We'll see what happened in 1865. It actually created a problem for the 1800s. But the Brits led us to intellectual property laws. And today, we own our creativity. The pattern that played out here is consumers had to act in collective action to negotiate with pools of power around this. The Catholic Church at the time was arguing that we can't pay artists and we can't pay musicians and writers because we have to educate the masses. So the argument for the commons. And this is where the whole campaign around starving artists came from. The counter-narrative from the community was, we're starving. And art is important to the human species. Like, if you can't figure out a way for us to pay, all the artists will die. I know this sounds very trite, but this was the argument in the 1600s. Okay? And here we are today, we own our creativity from collective formation. I don't need to remind everyone about slavery and having personal agency over our labor. Again, it was collective action. And there were many plantation owners who were arguing, how the hell am I supposed to pay people labor? How am I going to build these bridges and these beautiful churches and these amazing roads and these railroads? Are you kidding? It'll never work. And here we are, labor laws. Now, there were interesting conditions that led to these. One was the species was at risk. The intellectual center of gravity of the world recognized that if art wasn't democratized, the species would be at risk. If labor wasn't democratized, the species would be at risk. The second is, there was public uproar. There's always a counter-narrative. It's a campaign. Slavery, starving artists. Cambridge Analytica is what's triggering the public uproar for this one. Okay? And last but not least, the solution had to benefit consumers, corporations, and governments. Income tax, income tax. Okay? And you understand how consumers and corporations benefited from that. I believe we have the conditions necessary to play out that pattern for the 3rd time around our data. But we need agreement. And we need a massive way to show that all of those transactions that are going to be necessary, that Cartesian product of you and your data with a title of ownership and your property over it, to give rights to hundreds of organizations to use it for periods of time for specific purposes. And to arbitrate the beginning and the end of those leases, you need an infrastructure to do that. You can't do that with SQL Server databases and Informatica ETL jobs. Just not going to fly. Okay? So, again, my talk here is to inspire you to think about what other blockchain use cases you might want to thinking about. So, we have built a counter-narrative around human data that says my data is my property. Now, I understand that that is grammatically incorrect, but every time I say my datum is my property or my data are my property, it really freaks English-speaking people out. Okay? Well, we've created a counter-narrative. Now, I can talk later on about the technology and how we empower consumers with a property right. So we have an app that allows consumers to claim a property interest on their data. We act as a title company for digital property. We give them a title of ownership. We build all the appropriate legal documentation, own that store that off-chain, point it to some of the on-chain stuff, and then we allow them to set preferences and consent and authorization around it and bring corporations that want to operate in a trusted and transparent way into a shared market to get explicit leases and permissions.
But why 31?
Why 31? It's like I planted the professor. Agreements have an architecture. Now you could look at this chart and go, well, Richie, maybe human rights are not the tip of the pyramid. Maybe the 10 Commandments are the tip of the pyramid. And okay, we can have that discussion as well. But most of the agreements that we have currently have an architecture. On the left side of this chart, some UN-like party, not always the UN, that sets up a massive high-level architecture, kind of makes itself into sovereignties, manifests itself into laws, stands up industries, and then establishes a set of contracts. Now, I will tell you that the 30 human rights that we have weren't built that way. They were built in 1948 by looking back at the potholes in history and then defining 30 rights that would make sure that none of that stuff happens again. But it's mostly top-down, right? For those markets in the world that didn't recognize that slavery was illegal, it came to them this way, okay? We are using blockchain, and I understand the audacity of the statement that I'm about to make. We're using blockchain to build a human right from the bottom up, the 31st human right. We believe that there's a humanitarian issue in front of us, which is if we don't take control of our data, we don't only lose our privacy, we lose our agency. Most of the conversations that happened this morning talked about the power of extracting value from that data. And I know you're capable of that because I've watched some of your stuff and read some of your stuff. If you move that one step forward, you're talking about mass manipulation of the species. And we as a species, we're not really good at being kind to the members of society that we know better than they know themselves. I'll give you an example. Let me underscore this for you. Like I said, I'll take you to some dangerous places. I'll bring you back to a safe place in a second. Algorithms and companies are starting to understand us better than we understand ourselves. And that is a dangerous place to be in. Snapchat has an algorithm that can predict where a teenager is on a spectrum from straight to gay based on how they interact with images on their Snapchat application. Just let that process in your head for a second. Now, having that information is one thing, but do they have the ethical strength to not target that teenager, assuming that they're leaning to one end of the spectrum with content that was marked for the LGBTQ community? And what does that do to free will? There are hundreds of thousands of instances like that across commerce right now. And it's being done because we have no way of saying, I want you to use my data or I don't want you to use my data. And because the clarification of what ownership of data means is in complete absence of a global agreement. Now we're starting by renegotiating contracts. We're starting in healthcare in the US. I can talk to you guys offline about what we're doing there. Changing an industry process, drafting new laws, piloting in a country, and then eventually hoping to bubble that up to the folks at the massively important United Nations. We use the IBM blockchain. We're starting in healthcare. This is a crowd at one of the largest healthcare conferences in the US of people on stage declaring their 31st human right Those are all C-levels from healthcare companies on stage. I'm in the middle there, leading a revolution. There are state laws that are being introduced across the states in the United States of America that would allow consumers to claim a property interest on their healthcare data. This one is interesting because it has 40 of the 93 members of the Senate of Oregon with bipartisan support for it. Now, Oregon is a progressive state, but think about the tax income of the state. One of the things I want to highlight for you guys, the reason why corporations and countries need to get ownership and property rights around data, or some form of property right, is because data is siphonable. What do I mean by siphonable? Anybody grew up in the hood where you siphon gas from someone else's car back in the days? Like I grew up in Queens, New York. Okay? Siphonable. If you think about land and you think about oil and you think about salt, if I stand up, sir, let's assume you own a country, and I stand up a corporation in your country and I'm going to drill oil, I better be paying you taxes. Right? Agreed or disagree? I'm smiling. I'm watching your posture. I'm trying to figure out where you stand on my hypothesis. So that's why I asked you.
I'm on this panel, so you're going to find out.
Gotcha. So data is siphonable. You and I can incorporate a company in Delaware, get a small office in Menlo Park, build an app, drop it on the Apple Store, deploy it into the gentleman's country, and start siphoning the data off of his residence like crazy and monetizing it back in Menlo Park and barely paying taxes in Delaware. Just think about that for a second. You can't do that with oil, you can't do that with salt, you can't do that with land, you can't do that with labor. But data is massively siphonable. Which is why the country of Liberia implemented a global policy in the country at the ISP level that says, I don't want my citizens to come online the way the Americans came online with an AOL CD and a user's license agreement that didn't protect their digital footprint but a form of ownership. So we're the official digital title company for the country of Liberia. At the ISP level, the terms and conditions in the ISP actually claim a property right on any data for those citizens that is being created onwards. Cryptocurrency is to blockchain what AOL chat was to the internet. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions, or we could go to panel or lunch, whichever. Yes, sir.
How much should we worry about GlaxoSmithKline investing in 23andMe and what they can do with potential data for some of the places that are kind of like doing DNA sequencing and ancestry sequencing?
You must have followed me on the internet.
No, today's the first time I ever saw you.
Okay, got it.
I wanted to ask this
I've
question
been very
in a different
vocal
time.
on that topic in a couple of different op-eds across different publications. I think the contract is broken. So the issue with this stuff is that in B2C contracts, there's no real-time redline, right? Like in B2B contracts, you real-time redline all day. B2G contracts, you redline all day. Consumers, we just click accept and we have no negotiation in the process, right? My father signed about 4 contracts his whole life. His marriage certificate, his employment agreement, and maybe 3 other things. I'm just giving him some credit for 3 other contracts, okay? I signed 4 a day because of all the stuff that I do in my digital existence. So with 23andMe, it's a massive breach of contract, right? Yeah, so you had it in the fine print that you can do what you want with the data, but the equivalence is me putting my car in a garage, like my car is in a garage in Penn Station right now, and finding out that during the day, those guys are leasing my car out for Uber, right? So I think GSK is obviously a for-profit company, and they are interested in accelerating healthcare. And I do think that the genetic data sets could help accelerate healthcare. It comes with some privacy constraints to it, but the breach in contract and the breach in consumer agreement is what I find fascinating. And the issue is that most of these CEOs are so tone deaf that they don't understand the deterioration of trust that they just created. I mean, I do this thing now where it's amazing. Like, I tag the CEO of 23andMe when I do it, and I still get it. Every 2 days, I get an email in my inbox that says, hey, do you want to sign up for a survey to share your DNA? And I screenshot it, and I tag it, and I tag 23andMe and the CEO, and I still get it. It's been going on for 3 months. That's how tone deaf the markets are around the provenance of data. I think it's a fantastic example.
Tiny, quick, just follow up. Should one of my family members did something like that? Is there any worry that I need to have because people within my family tree are getting involved with it, or is there a way that I can kind of try to protect myself from it?
So DNA data is unique. Your healthcare record, like your EHR record, doesn't have the same implications of your gene tree like your like your DNA does. I think to understand the problem, we have to parse the problem very quickly. Most people paint data with a very broad brush. Like Facebook data and EHR data, they think of it as the same category. I got news for you. Your Facebook data, you are getting a consideration back from a legal perspective. Also, the monetization is being done by the company that you're in contract with. Okay? With your healthcare data, you're not getting a consideration back because I pay my doctor, I pay my pharmacy, I pay my lab. I'm actually self-insured, so I literally pay. Okay? I know everybody else pays through insurance. And the monetization is being done by a company that you're not even in contract with. So it's not like doctor monetizing my healthcare data. It's the EHR company or the data broker who I don't even know they exist that's monetizing my data. So that's the first. Specific to DNA data, we have to separate privacy from protection from property rights, right? So privacy is what you're getting at, which is, if I commit a crime somewhere else, right? My brother's saliva can help identify me. He's known for dribbling all around the world. He's a basketball player. No, I'm kidding. That'd be cool though. So there's privacy, there's protection of the data, and then there's also the property interest, right? Anyone ever heard of Henrietta Lacks?
Yeah, Mortal Cell.
There you go, ma'am.
Yeah.
Right? So we are living in a world where we're creating more and more data every day. The data is becoming more and more valuable. It's being used to automate our jobs, which is, I would argue, is good. Okay? But we have to figure out how we live proper lives as well. If the data is being used to automate our jobs, then we definitely need to get to the Star Trek economy. And in the Star Trek economy, data could be the currency. Thank you very much.
Question.
Okay, I don't know what the rules are here, so I'll just keep going. I can do this all day long.
Jim's in charge of this.
Jim's in charge. So we got one question here and one question there.
So
Yes, ma'am.
on the 23andMe and data, is it aggregated when it's being used, or is it individually used as private information in some other type of a data bank? Answer that question any way you feel comfortable.
Fantastic. So the core of the question that you're asking actually is re-identification.
Yeah.
Okay? I don't understand de-identifying DNA data. It just doesn't compute in my head. Like, it's mathematically not sound. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, how do you de-identify DNA data? That is, like, that just freaks me out. Like, that's the world's biggest digital oxymoron, right? However, re-identification is inevitable even for your EHR data, and there's been multiple academic studies that have shown it can be done. So even the protections of HIPAA that says you have to remove the PHI, which, by the way, do you guys know where business associate agreements came from in HIPAA? How many people understand HIPAA? Okay, I'm going to give you a really, really quick tidbit. This is really good bar conversation. HIPAA has a clause that says a business associate of a covered entity is those who are covered by the law, like a doctor, can actually have access to the data. In 1995, when the law was being drafted, passed in 1996, I went back and found the old lobbyists. I've been studying this for 20 years. I can tell you guys how I got to this in 20 years. Okay? The Cleaning Association's Lobby of America came to the legislature and said, hey, if you guys pass this law, we can't clean hospitals because we're not covered entities and we're in there in the manila folders cleaning those rooms. We're going to lose our contracts. And the HVAC companies jumped on and the electrician companies jumped on and said, what the hell? We need to be in those hospitals. And so the legislators created something called a business associate that says a business associate of a covered entity can have access to the data. Okay? For the first 5 years after HIPAA was passed, most business associate agreements were cleaning companies, HVAC companies, and electricity companies. And then EHR companies came around, realized they couldn't sell software to doctors at a profitable price, lowered the price like crazy, offered it for free, classified themselves as a business associate, has the data in their cloud, and decided to de-identify it and sell it to improve healthcare in a $67 billion industry, and I still can't solve my sinus problems. Okay? That's the answer to your question. Yes, sir?
So if you go back to the librarian case here, where you have a centralized
government. So again, you go from a centralized entity. That's one thing. On the other side of it is human behavior. So blockchain is all based on game theory.
Mhm.
And so when you're dealing with human behavior game theory, which I'm a form of that, just like crypto economics is, you're talking about changing the paradigm on people wanting what they want now, which is access to this app or that app and the quick agreement to a EULA, versus a centralized entity such as the government of Liberia putting in legislation that puts something at the ISP level that you spoke about.
So the legislation at the ISP level is to allow consumers to claim a property interest on the data. And the property is the fundamental, any lawyers in the room? Or law school people? Like, there you go, sir. Property is the fundamental fabric of our civilization, right? So property interest and property rights sort of what drives most of commerce and most of government. I'd be happy to hear your thoughts on the United States being a title from the British government, and we can talk about that on the panel. So what the government is installing is a legislative agenda that says consumers own a property right, which means all of the benefits of property right are not added to data. For example, if you donate it, you should get a tax write-off. For example, you can pass it off in your estate. I can't tell you how many dead people's data is being monetized right now, and their existing family members are not sharing in any of that value, right? If it's used without your permission, it's theft. I actually had an interesting conversation with an EMR CEO. Ma'am, you will find this interesting that asked the question earlier. I had a conversation with an EMR CEO about 5 years ago, and I said, you understand you're stealing the data, right? Like, you get it. And he goes, yeah, but it's not like it's a crime. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, it's not like it's somebody's property. And I thought, man, this is fascinating. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Richard. I think we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back to the panel discussion. Good job.
What time are we coming back?
You guys want 10 minutes? What do you want?
Hey Jim, let's just do it right now.
Want to do it now?
Yeah, everybody's here, let's do it.
Maybe you try to stand up and stretch your legs a little bit. You have to do
Let's do 3 jumping jacks each, and
I'm tired. You're tired? Go get some coffee.
Is that what it was?
Fascinating so far. I'm really enjoying it. Yeah, I think
Constitutional rights.
That's what I
Raj, I can't remember. I thought we were going to lunch. He's got a.
We have lunch?
He says that, and we were in a conversation, he said that. And so, and we had a whole exchange on that. Is there any Wait, Jim. I would have heard the fur one. Yeah. You know, so we mentioned before, you would.
No, I'm just telling you, I'm an independent.
Oh, okay, good, yeah. Oh, they were good. So I'm holding myself back because there are so many things that I just like. Imagine, were you independent? Imagine that. Are we doing it?
I think I said about 5.
And
price differential like a car stretch.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
The self-driving
Yeah, so no, I started.
Because that's where the service differentiators can go from market. More than likely, the reason it's doing is that we're
that's great.
to sell one person. But the data set that's used to drive that self-driving cars algorithm is going to be the price differentiator. Right? You want an algorithm that runs on safe cars, or do you want an algorithm that runs on...
No, I live in Bloomsbury.
Oh, Bloomsbury.
Okay, so it was
these are the implications.
I got an affiliate at like 9:30. I'm back up to late. I took the Amtrak. I got TC at like 2:45.
What we have right now is a healthcare
I got to
site.
speak at 2 o'clock on health.
And I would
And then the panel afterward. I'm supposed to moderate the panel,
It's just,
but.
it's the same thing that happened with intellectual property laws. We moved the value chain
I'm also
one
researcher.
step further to the same thing with slavery. We moved the value chain.
Lots of good little things here, but
We're just going to move the value chain
I think
one step closer to the
and
consumer.
I hope to do in my.
And there are markets there.
We'll see what they say.
It's like crazy already.
I'm an attorney and also actually so I'm a little bit of a different kind of lawyer. I used to work at Stanford Linear Accelerator.
Well, we've dealt with that in the 1600s, and we dealt with it in the 1800s again.
Basically,
Large companies didn't want that to happen.
physicist, I went to law school, so now I'm an adjunct faculty at GW.
You know, I say this
and a law firm as
only
well, so
for
we're very
expression of
involved in this
thought.
kind of space. So when I hear
One of the-
non-lawyers saying
One
these
of the
things,
organizations
I like
that
listening to
was
it, and
against
like
our premises,
the enthusiasm they have, but
It's fascinating.
Physical
To
world.
think that the
out there.
ACLU would
Do
do
against comments after.
ownership rights for data. Because the argument is that rich people would never sell their data and hence would have some form of privacy, but poor people will sell their data and have some form of privacy.
Yeah, well, it seems like
So
you're
we
good
would have
guys. It sounds
privacy
like this is
classes
pretty
in the
smart
digital
guys.
world. So our counter-argument is, wait a second, we have
Yeah, that's
privacy
something that I
classes
have
in
to
the
tell
analog world.
because with the broadcast.
I can choose to send my postcard in an envelope,
and I'm not.
you can choose to send your postcard without an envelope. We have choice.
I consistently.
By the way, the first privacy law in the US is
like
around
my
postcards and envelopes.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that was the
saying,
thing,
you know,
but when we explain to the
property
ACLU
ownership
that we're talking about one of the most strategic natural resources of the world, better clothes, better salt, better land and
I
land,
own it or something.
and only white men are extracting value from their data right now.
There's a whole legacy.
Change their
system out
perspective
there.
Yeah, when he was talking about taking data and putting it out in the hands of the populace.
I need to know who you are.
How are we going to take down the people out?
Where's America? Is that a good thing?
Well, I want to address that issue.
I should call my president.
It's an aspirational goal, but that's not the three ways. Sure. I also, people want to say my data, my property. Yeah, that's the goal, but that's not what it is. It's kind of, you got to work through the system right now, and that's the problem. There's a legacy system.
That's what's struggling with our generation.
I think it's, our generation struggled with it.
Yeah.
Vietnam War, things like that. So every generation does that. So these views and
Maybe-
these goals
maybe
and the advocacy are
Maybe deserve that we don't have as much debt as we have now, and maybe we have money before we
I wish this administration would address that issue and keep hyping the economy, but I wish it's being subsidized by the debt.
Did you see that they projected that the budget will come good in 11 years? Now it's 3, it was 4, that they actually forecasted in 11 years when they would return to economic investment.
You know, watching Bill Maher the other day, and he had a fake little candidacy where a student in the audience asked Bill Maher running for president. The debt is now $38 trillion. What is your plan? I mean, this is the question that comes up every election, and nobody ever does anything.
And people also don't talk about the debt either, because there's something over there.
All right. Thomas is here.
I think we're going to have
And Pat is here. Where's Sonia?
Yeah, break time might be just about over. We're going on to the panel. He's in charge.
So,
But Jim, why don't you go out there and
rally the troops?
get them in there?
Hey, Jim,
Yes, sir.
there's a discussion about announcing lunch now.
Who needs lunch? Come on.
I mean,
A few people, they are saying they are hungry and they already left the school.
I'm hungry too.
I'm also a little peckish, but I hear all these good studies on intermittent fasting, so it might be all right for us.
Maybe I'll get one more glass of coffee.
Yeah, that's always the route to go.
I'm good to go for another hour.
It wasn't a knee replacement, it was a knee surgery.
Yeah, the torn meniscus.
Yeah, that's what exactly what it was, torn meniscus.
Yeah, it's like that.
Yeah, 2 tears, he went in, and I just thought, a little further along, it was like,
I'll tell you what was the surgery, the rehab.
that's it.
All right. So I'm sure everybody has somewhere they have to go, right? Why don't we get started? Where's Sonia?
She stepped out.
Okay, so does somebody have her number?
I think she ran upstairs to grab something to eat.
Okay. Let's wait for her.
What?
Yeah.
texture.
All right, I'm gonna leave here at 1 o'clock because I have to run and teach my class. But Thomas is gonna take over as moderator when I leave here exactly at 1. Because he's a professor and he can do this stuff, anyhow. Right? Come on, you can do it.
Whatever.
All right, so why don't we,
Let's get Richie in there. Where is he?
he's just right outside finishing up the interview. Why don't we get,
I don't know, Gavin.
Do you have a business card?
yeah.
Wait for you.
All right,
There she is.
she's coming?
Tanya.
Okay. Sonia's here so we can start.
Thanks,
We're waiting
Jim.
for you.
I know you were
Are
waiting
you
for
gonna
other
eat while
people
you're on the-
besides me.
come on,
No,
eat.
I'm not gonna eat.
Oh, no,
You
no.
brought everything, you brought food for everyone?
I thought Leon was on my plate.
You brought food for everyone?
All right.
Did you bring food for everyone?
Did I know, but I can't. I can go on the back.
No. We're all gonna starve.
Let's get started.
Okay, come on in. So what I'm gonna do really quick so we can get this started. For those who have not introduced themselves, Richie and I have already, and Oki's not here, but that's okay. So why don't we start and sort of, introduce yourself. Who are you? Where you're from? Are you an 8A company? Yes or no? Are you open for business? Yes or no? And just give us a little bit of background. So Sonia, you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sonia Mundra. I'm the president of a company called Chiniga Analytic. We are an Alaska Native corporation. What that means is that we are 100% owned by the tribe of Chiniga in Alaska. All profits are returned back to our tribal shareholders. We do records management and IT solutions, professional services for the federal government. And we're based right here locally in Northern Virginia.
Excellent. Okay.
Venkat Kodamudi. Today I'm leading innovation and outreach for CGI's federal division. In 2 weeks, I'm actually taking over as the blockchain practice lead for CGI's commercial group in the US. Been a technologist for over 25 years. Blockchain is something that I've been playing around with for about 2 years now, and did my own work on the cryptocurrency side and the business side. So,
Excellent. Okay, Thomas?
I'm an attorney here in Washington, D.C. I'm also on the adjunct faculty at Washington, D.C., George Washington University, where I teach in a graduate business school. And but my background is kind of unusual. I was a physicist before I became a lawyer, actually, kind of a nuclear quantum physicist. I worked at the Stanford Linear Accelerator, Livermore Labs, designing nuclear bombs, so a lot of kind of sophisticated technology. So I'm kind of a little different kind of lawyer. I'm very excited by these, ideas, and share the same enthusiasm my colleagues share on these ideas. But I do kind of bring a sense of reality with the legal perspective. So I'm going to offer some comments on that today.
you gotta be careful.
You're going to wear your lawyer's hat? Thomas, are you going to wear your lawyer's hat? Okay, no, that's great. It's very important to understand, how far we can sort of take this technology in the current environment. Now, so I want to start off the discussion, and I want to sort of understand the genesis of this whole thing, this blockchain, right? So Sonia, could you tell us a little bit about, what changes in the business climate gave rise to this whole thing called the blockchain?
Yeah, absolutely. So there were, some events obviously in 2002 where we had kind of a collapse of really what was considered a blue chip company, right? That was Enron. And, they were basically aided by it was supposed to be their third-party auditor, which was, of course, Arthur Andersen. Both companies are now defunct. And then in 2008, of course, I think all of us remember the kind of the global meltdown and recession that we had, where we had massive failures. If you look at it, was every day we had this crisis of confidence, bankruptcies of these huge companies that were considered too big to fail, like Lehman Brothers, AIG, and many, many others. So that kind of global crisis of confidence really led to basically the rise of blockchain, where people said, okay, you know what, we clearly can't trust these third-party intermediaries. You know, we don't want to get in a situation where we've got companies that have done the wrong thing, are getting bailed out, and are considered too big to fail. So that kind of gave rise to this idea of, you know, multiple authorities and decentralization of a single intermediary.
Excellent, excellent. You know, it's kind of funny, in 2008, I used to be on Wall Street as a trader, and that was a really bad sort of period for anybody on Wall Street. Did anyone work on Wall Street in 2008? It was a total disaster. Did you work on Wall Street? Oh, cool. Okay, so, you know, I want to sort of understand, you know, the potential of blockchain. So Thomas, you know, as the lawyer on the panel, why don't you tell us a little bit about, you know, what types of legal, regulatory, policy issues are possibly hindering the implementation of this wonderful blockchain technology that you're so bullish on?
So again, you know,
Wow, talk about leading the witness.
I share the enthusiasm that I see, you know, with our speakers today and all the other conferences I go to, and I get that. I like technology a lot. I think it's a lot of fun. It's exciting and can serve so many tremendous purposes for efficiency, but society as well, etc. Here's kind of the issue. I mean, I hear all these aspirational goals for blockchain, but the problem is you're building it onto a legacy system, a system that already exists there. And so it's this concept that we are, and you hear this, I hear it a number of times from coders and things like that. There's this vision we're building an alternate universe where we're starting from scratch with the values and the laws and the regulations that are going to change the world and make it a better world. So I get that. The problem is the legacy systems of the existing governments. So just as an example, let's take the data issue, all right? And we're going to do a healthcare panel and speech later this afternoon. So we hear this, my data, my property, and these little colloquialisms like possession is 9/10 of the law and things like that. The problem is that it's aspirational. There are existing laws that deal with these issues. So in the United States, for example, as Richie said, HIPAA deals with access. It deals with privacy and access, not ownership. But the ownership issues is a mess in the United States. It's basically controlled by state law. There's only one state, I think it's New Hampshire, that says that the patient owns its data. The other states say that the facility that generates the data owns the data. And that's about half of the states. And then the other half of the states haven't said anything, or legislatively, or if they have said something, they said it through the judicial system, who made up some common law concept. So that issue is addressed in the United States, and it's a hodgepodge. It's diverse. It's all over the place. So the other issue that I think Richie was alluding to was intellectual property. You know, copyright law is where this comes in. Copyright law is very clear. If you're the author of the creation and you reduce it to a tangible media, you own that property. And I do this in my class, and I'll do it for you right now. I take a picture. I take another picture, all right? I now own the copyright to that picture because I'm the original author and I reduced it to a tangible media, which is the microchip in my phone. If I stitch these two photos together, I still own that. That's called a derivative right. I write a novel and Hollywood produces a movie from it. The author of the novel has rights to that because the movie is a derivative work. So when you have a medical facility generating data, technically under copyright law, they own that data. Now how does this interplay with the state law? Got me, I don't know. I don't think we've quite seen that issue emerge. But these are two areas of existing legacy law that deal with that issue. Right? So you can have this aspirational goal, and I agree with the goal. It should be my data, my property. I get that, all right? But that's going to take legislative change, certainly in the United States, probably in other countries. So I have other things I want to say, but I'll work them into the conversation.
Yeah, okay, perfect.
Thomas, I want to ask you a question. If I pay you to take the picture of me, if I pay you to take the picture of me,
Who owns the picture?
So that's a work for hire. So the contract will address that issue.
Okay, so when I pay the doctor to measure my heart rate, who owns the data?
So it may be subject to contract. And so you may get an MRI, or you may get blood test results, and then ask your doctor or the lab to send me those results. What if you got those results and it had a notice on the bottom, MRI Laboratories owns this data, it shall be not distributed or monetized without the prior written approval of MRI Laboratories?
Yeah, you go crazy.
What would you do?
Go crazy.
You know, you call your lawyer or something and say, hey, can they do that? And arguably they can.
So the issue here is there's an absence of agreement. Right.
Well, I think yeah, you could say it that way. I mean, it's an issue that there's a lot of diverse results right now, and it probably would take federal legislation to resolve this issue.
So this is actually very interesting because, you know, we're dealing with a particular technology that is actually, you know, pushing regulation, right? Because we haven't seen such things before. You know, let's take this because it's a panel discussion and we have some people here that can really help us understand, you know, what's going on with blockchains and the data and provenance, right? So Venkat, can you just sort of help us understand, you know, this notion of provenance in the blockchains in light of GDPR? Because in Europe, they kind of protect the citizens' data a little bit more than in other countries, right? So could you sort of comment, first of all, explain this notion of provenance on the blockchain, and then sort of, you know, why doesn't the US incorporate such sort of, you know, systems here, or do we?
Actually, we do. Oki spoke about the use case, the accounting use case that HHS did for procurement. That what he was talking about is the provenance of the data. He did speak about having the data itself off-chain, but what the blockchain contained was who did what, when, and how to the data. Essentially, that's the provenance, right? So when we start talking about GDPR and especially my right to protect the data, so the question we have to address is, should the provenance associated with the data, should that be allowed to be forgotten or not? So that's, in my mind, is the primary issue that needs to be addressed. And it all depends on how you architect the solution, if I may. There are ways to, and the other area that you have to address is archiving, so because that goes hand in hand, right? Again, going back to, it depends on how you architect the data. What I'm here to say is that, yes, there is a way to solve legally the problem in the technology perspective, but it depends on how you address the data.
Okay, so, you know, my understanding of blockchains is there's actually two types of hashing that occurs. One is that you create a block and you can hash all the information on the block and you stick that into the next block, right? So the second block has the hash of the previous block, right? And so that's how you link the blocks together. However, in that structure, in that architectural structure, you can also put inside some attestation or a fingerprint of the data that you want to collect. So there's actually two hashing that occurs in one particular blockchain. Now, you know, my understanding is that you can hash whatever data you want, and then Bitcoin gets the transactions that's in there. It's called a Merkle tree root for those who are technical. And so that is the, you know, the original structure. However, many people said, hey, this is a little bit too, you know, constrained. Why don't we open this up? Why don't we put code inside there, right? Why don't we allow this thing to sort of add more things? And this is where the whole industry, whether it's, you know, understanding where a product goes on a ship to ship to ship, you're putting a record inside the blockchain so that someone can audit it. Now, a lot of people have this confusion. They say, oh, once it's on the blockchain, it can never move and it's there forever. Well, the reality is that if you perturb the blockchain, which anyone can do, everybody knows that you don't have the same blockchain and something happened to the data, okay? So it's not as rigorous as some people say, right? It's the notion of being able to confirm that you and I have the same data, right? We have the same blockchain, and we have the fingerprints of the data, and that's what's important. So there's an on-chain, which is blocks chained together, and there's data that's off-chain that puts a fingerprint in each of those blocks, right? So, you know, help me think about this Richie, what is that the core invention of the blockchain? Is there more? And why might this be important, and not shaping these markets? I mean, I know you're a strong proponent that people should own their data, and I understand there's this tension with the laws as it exists now, right? But is there something that we're missing in terms of the innovation of the blockchain and how you sort of foresee this going forward?
Yeah. I'm going to pretend like I just didn't share with you that I have a slightly Martin Luther King posture and get to the technology instead. So talking about the cryptography, so let's just parse it for a second. By the way, the synonym block and the synonym chain, actually, if you understand why it's called blocking and chaining, you understand blockchain very, very, very well. Chaining is using asymmetric cryptography to do what's called a hash, which is essentially taking a lot of data and turning it into 256 bytes. Taking everything that came in a record before it, putting it into the hash, and then writing a new record with a key that is a result of all records that came before it. And then when another record is written, you take the first record that had a key, the second record, which the key was derived by the first record and the second record, and the third record, put it in the same thing, and you have a key again. And the fourth record, the same thing happens. You take everything that came before it, plus the contents of the fourth record, hash to create a key. All you're doing is you're using these keys to chain the records together. So that if someone were to remove a record, you can very quickly take the formula and look at the keys and go, whoa, 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 some finagling happened there. Okay? So that's where chain comes from. So the first component of the technology is it reduces the effort and the time that's needed to investigate if finagling happened to a data set. I'm oversimplifying it massively. Okay? That's the first part of it. Removes effort and time needed to figure out if someone was messing around with the data along the way. Blocking is the notion, and I should go back and said, blockchains are really sophisticated databases. They have two superpowers. The first superpower is a database by itself. The records are chained together, so it's really easy to test to see if it was finagled with. The second superpower is every time you stamp one of those databases and somebody else has one, so if the four of us here has one copy of it, they have a known characteristic to find consensus between each other. So they syndicate, and there are various modes of consensus. There's all sorts of ways you could find consensus. As a matter of fact, the difference between most of the blockchains is actually not the chaining part, it's the consensus part, okay? They find consensus with each other over some block of time. Whether it's 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days. That's where the two syllables of the word comes from. So if you think about it, you have this technology that is essentially a new type of database that comes with two superpowers. One is, it's cheaper and faster to figure out whether the data was finagled with, and two is, it's cheaper and faster to keep all of them in sync. That pattern is no different from the cloud, right? Like talking about the cryptography and the consensus is like me saying my photographs are actually running a virtualized machine on the Apple server that's actually using storage over compute for iCloud, right? It's like, it's that crazy. So from a business perspective, there are many use cases that existed for years that were just too expensive and too complicated to build because it's so expensive and complex to verify data, and it's so expensive and complex to make sure that we're all in sync. And so now that you have this technology that lowers the cost and the effort to do that, you see all these use cases come to life. So I'll give you a really interesting use case that most people don't talk about. I forgot the name of the company, and that's probably good because I don't give them free promotion because I'm not interested in it. But there's a company that has used the blockchain. Any gamers in the room? So if you're a gamer and you play games, like you can do all sorts of interesting stuff. You could buy a purple cloak, or you could buy, like a sword that glistens, right? For years, there was this use case that says, why don't the gaming companies get together? And if I buy a sword that glistens in this game, when I get to the next game, can I just carry over the sword? I don't want to pay 99 cents for the sword again. And there's tons of economic reasons why this would work, because the second programming company doesn't have to write the software for the sword. The issue is, that's really expensive infrastructure to get all these gaming companies and all these gamers at the same time. That thing is running on a blockchain now. That business case that was never profitable because it was so expensive to have all the databases and all the interactions and all the consensus suddenly became profitable to do. And that is the business construct of blockchain. Forget all the socioeconomic stuff that I was talking about before. Right? That's the fundamental, in the boardroom of a company, that's where it's at. It's lower cost, lower time to do these two things, and now suddenly use cases that were too expensive to do can be done.
Absolutely.
So
I think that's a great point. No, please go ahead.
There's one more area that the business benefit quite a bit, right? And especially when we talk about governance, which is the auditability or the lack thereof, or the need of lack of need thereof. Maybe that's
Yeah, audits are expensive, right? Audits are like this is why most people don't build audit design. Like the audit pattern really gets built into software because it's not only expensive, it's a lot of processing power on hardware. Think about every single log that you would ever have to put on an audit. Think about everybody who touches something at one point, right? So that's a perfect use case of audit, which was at one point too expensive. That's not.
And one of the things that I always talk about when it comes to blockchain, how many of you use Sweet and Low, right? Or Equal, one of those sweeteners, right? There was a lawsuit that happened in the 90s where during clinical trial testing of the sweetener, right, where the company that initiated the clinical trial hired a few small labs to do the trials for them, and one of the companies submitted the results to the parent company and said, at human consumption of 1,000 of these units of these sweeteners, it becomes bad for the human being. Whereas what happened was when this company submitted it to FDA for approval, it was changed to 10,000.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a law so what happened? There was a lawsuit ensued, audit ensued, and then the lab won actually because luckily for them,
the copy of it.
Right. So imagine all these things will not be existing if this whole clinical trial process was done in blockchain.
Interesting.
So that's actually a big application. One of the big applications for blockchain, besides healthcare records, is clinical records, and they're verified. And you see that you won't see these changes, or if you do see it, you'll see it in the blockchain.
You'll see the finagling happen.
You'll see the finagling, yeah. So it's the transparency of that kind of thing. So that's really terrific. But if I could just have a minute, I want to address this consensus and agreement kind of issue, because I'm willing to be corrected on this, but my understanding is Bitcoin, for example, roughly about, I keep reading, 70% of Bitcoin is verified by China. And they're big computers in China. Now that's not decentralized, that is centralized. Now, my understanding is that when the coders saw this was antithetical to their goal, which is decentralization. So the technology pivoted, and I think we got coins like Monero, so that made it much more difficult to centralize that kind of processing. But you know, this is one of the threats that I see. A couple of things. First, there's one of the threats I see to this technology. But the interesting thing is how the technology pivots. Sure. When that happens, when existing legacy systems or governments or whatever try to monopolize or do something that's antithetical to the policy goals of blockchain, the technology pivots. Right?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily the technology pivots, but I think the network participants say, hang on a second. We know that the blockchain will fall apart if 51% of somebody owns all the power. And I know everyone's out there mining and trying to make some money, and you're sort of allowing people in China, to do this mining, and they can see who's doing the mining, right? They know where these IPs are. Oh, it looks like there's more than enough over there. We should try mining somewhere else. And remember, the participants are just human beings. They don't want to see the network go down, right? So they have a vested interest in trying to police their own sort of network. Now, my contention is that, I see this stuff developing, and consensus is great. I think it's a really nice mechanism where there's no central power in place, right? And I believe that by and large, there's about 90–95% of people on the Bitcoin blockchains are good actors, and there's only a few bad actors, and it's a very strong network. But I want to sort of switch the conversation a little bit towards the next generation that we're seeing of the blockchains. And these are the security tokens that are coming out, okay? So in 2017, people got burned. I think in 2018, people were no longer doing ICOs, and they were looking at securitizing assets using the blockchain. And so I want to ask, Sonia about the blockchain helping with one component of this, which is the anti-money laundering and know your customer. Because now we're starting to see institutional investors take a look at how to invest in a tokenized asset. And now it's opening up this really, really interesting door, because you can tokenize real estate, you can tokenize stocks, you can tokenize bonds, but it's very important for regulators to make sure that they're not bad actors coming into this place. And so one of the services I think some of these startups are providing is anti-money laundering and know your customer, and they're using the blockchain. So could you sort of discuss what you're seeing in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who may not be familiar, KYC is know your customer, and so the purpose behind those regulations is to make sure that when you are, part of exchanging money or part of any type of transaction that involves money, that you understand as a bank, right, that where is that money coming from? What is the ultimate source of the money? We want to make sure that it's not quote unquote dirty money, something from narcotics, trafficking, anti-human trafficking is a big thing, right? So anything that's kind of unsavory or money laundering, we want to make sure that the banks have a responsibility to follow KYC and anti-money laundering type of regulations. So, for example, banks in Singapore now are using the blockchain, and this is kind of ironic too, because a lot of people thought that the banks would be very anti-blockchain, right? This is a little bit of a diversion, right? Because they are the central intermediary, right? So people are like, oh, the big banks are going to go down, et cetera. And a lot of like we talked about earlier, the banks, a lot of people were angry at the banks, so that's why they started the blockchain. But I think it is a little bit ironic that we're seeing the banks kind of being those first movers when it comes to the blockchain. I guess they're smart in that way. So they're basically, when you're thinking about, for example, a real estate transaction, what's interesting is on the blockchain, a lot of times people will work through an agent, right? Because they don't want to disclose their identity. And this isn't necessarily nefarious, right? So if you've got a syndicated type of transaction, or you've got somebody who's a celebrity, like for example Jennifer Lopez, or someone wants to go, buy a home. The person, if they know that it's a celebrity or someone like that that has a lot of money, they're going to automatically raise the value of the transaction, which is a lot of times why people work through an agent when they're doing the real estate transactions. So what's interesting is that with the blockchain, even while the buyer and seller are working through an agent, their identity may not be disclosed. Still, the banks are able to, through a blockchain, verify. Okay, well, what is the ultimate source of the money? So the bank can see it as the intermediary, but the buyer and seller don't need to know each other's identities, and they're actually saving a lot of money, significant amounts of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, on KYC regulations by using a blockchain.
It's interesting you mentioned this, because intermediary, right? One of the benefits that blockchain provides that you just mentioned is the need or lack or no need for an intermediary, right? But one thing to note is that when automobile was invented or discovered, the horse carriage industry didn't go away; they just got repurposed. And that's the evolution that you're going to see, is these intermediaries who don't necessarily need to exist once blockchain comes into picture, I think are going to be repurposed. And in fact, it's a benefit for the intermediaries to get into the oxymoronic way of looking at it. For them to get into blockchain and for them to push blockchain, which is probably why you're seeing the banking industry looking at blockchain. So, say similar utility industry, you're going to see these distribution companies when now with the concept of solar energy and renewable energies, you're seeing a lot of householders. There's a new term called prosumers, right? Producer consumers. You're going to see that's coming up, and they themselves can be producers and consumers. And energy sharing is going to become more prevalent and prominent with the advent of blockchain, but the distributors are going to be repurposed, is the way I feel.
Yeah, so I think this STO issue is really the right issue to raise at this time, because when this whole thing started, of course, we were doing ICOs, and there was a lot of hype and excitement about that. And we all know the SEC eventually came out in 2017 and said, we think these ICOs are securities and should be regulated. That's been their position from day one. And since then, they have systematically been enforcing those securities laws, and they've seen a lot of fraud. And we've all seen a lot of fraud, and there's been a lot of repercussions that have given cryptocurrencies a bad name. So by actually pivoting to an STO, what that means is that they're saying this issuance now is a security. And just briefly, to take a second to say what that means. What that means is if you're going to issue a security, you must register that security under Section 5 of the 1933 Securities Act. It must be registered. The problem is that is a really big deal. So the SEC has issued a number of exemptions, and maybe you know some of them, like Regulation D is very popular, 506B, 506C, crowdfunding regulation, Reg CF, Reg S for international investors, Reg A Plus came out of the Jobs Act. So, this is a more abbreviated way. You don't have to do a full-blown Section 5 filing. But if you go with one of these exemptions, what that means is you don't have to file a Section 5 filing. You're exempt if you do the exemption properly, but you are still a security. And this is what people forget. If you're still a security, it means all of the other securities regulations apply to you. For example, Rule 10b-5 on fraud. So if you do a white paper, you better make sure you're not making excessive puffing and fraudulent statements or omitting material information in that white paper, because the securities laws are still lurking in the background to come back and take. But this is a positive development, a very positive development for digital securities to have this happen. If I could just say one more point, because she mentioned real estate. I was just on a panel a couple of weeks ago about tokenization of real estate assets. This is a tremendous application. If you have an apartment building, for example, with 500 apartments, and maybe you want investors, the traditional way of doing that was you do a general partnership and then you sell limited partnerships, and maybe it's $25,000 or $50,000 or a minimum $5,000 to buy an LP. If you tokenize that asset and you do basically an STO, now you can fractionalize that ownership. There are two amazing things about this. You can fractionalize that ownership so people can buy $200 worth of interest in that asset. This gives access to a capital pool that hasn't been available for. And the chairman of the SEC has been very vocal in saying he supports capital formation, policies that support capital formation. And this is one of those policies. The other thing it does is it gives you an easier way to liquidate that token once you have it. The alternative trading systems, ATSs, are being set up right now. T0, Templum, and several others. Now you've got a platform where you can liquidate more easily than you had in the LP. So this is an amazing area that's just starting to materialize.
And what we're seeing more and more with raising capital is we're seeing more of these micropayments, democratization, right, which was the whole purpose of this, blockchain, to get everything kind of decentralized, give everybody more access to capital. I think when it's regulated properly, ICOs are a very positive thing. And then you talked about reduced transaction costs associated with, buying and then subsequently liquidating the investment. So yes, I agree. Very exciting.
Can I parse that for a second? The construct of micro ownership or the fractionalization of assets. I just want to go back to the pattern, right? Co-ops are micro ownership, right, of real estate. They're just not really microscopic. They're slightly bigger, and so the infrastructure, the technology infrastructure, allows you to deal with 100,000 investors as opposed to 14 investors. And it allows you to deal with just-in-time liquidation and transfer of assets as opposed to capital calls that are usually done when real estate buildings are built, and because that infrastructure is cheaper and more secure to do. So the securitization, and you talked about STO, I just want to parse this for the crowd, right? So most people that talk about securitized token offerings, they're talking about
coins, which are units of things, whatever is in them, that now reflect the space on the cap table of the company. Okay? And that's why
A cap table is a capitalization table, so you have assets here, and you have equity, and you have debt. So you can break down equity into, you know, senior, there's a whole bunch of different types of equity.
it's a long class.
It's a long class.
Right?
And there's- you have to, they're not Wall Street
Yeah,
guys. You have
sorry.
to-
So if you're starting a company, right, everybody has stocks in the company, right? Founders have stock, investors have stock, etc. The notion of a securitized token is to say, look, you can have a fractional share in my company that's a token, but you don't have voting rights as a shareholder, because most securitized tokens don't have voting rights. Shareholders can vote.
Just to intersect, I mean, you can structure the STO any way you want,
If you
just like
want
as
to.
traditional
Right,
stock.
no, that's why I said most,
It's
right?
flexible.
But the issue with the STO, I think, is from a society acceptance standpoint, which is where I'm seeing the markets go, is that most of the people who invested in ICOs, I'm not saying all, most of the people didn't understand markets. Right? Most of the people who are investing in STOs, I'm not saying all, doesn't understand markets either. Because if you believe that my securitized token has value, you are a special kind of idiot to not buy my stock. Do you understand what I'm saying? So we have to parse that. So that's the first. The second is the securitization of assets themselves that are not cap tables, but things like real estate. I think that's where the value is. So when we talk about STOs, we have to get away from the cap table. The securitized token on the cap table is going to end up like the ICOs. It's the securitization of assets, like cars or real estate. That's what's interesting, because why would you buy an interest in my company if you don't have voting rights? I don't understand.
Yeah, because of the dividend, or guaranteed dividend, or
Right.
preferred dividend,
So-
or something like
so-
that. But
so
the
you take a look
anti-illusion
at
about
T0,
being stupid
right?
or something like that, that's what the securities laws are about. The SEC doesn't say this is a good investment or a bad investment. They just require full disclosure of information
of what it
so
is.
you can evaluate whether the risk-return characteristics are appropriate for your portfolio. That's why when you don't disclose all information or you disclose fraudulent information, those are legal violations.
And the self-ordering is very, very complex here, right? And I'm glad you brought up puffery. Like, a lot of people didn't read the Securities Act. Like, puffery is actually in the Act
So
9
the
times.
thing is, like, who writes these white papers for these guys?
It's just puffery.
Well, it's the sponsors, and
Well,
they're so excited,
well,
and
let's-
that's terrific. That's why you need outside legal counsel to look at it to give a sense of reality
Absolutely,
to it.
absolutely. Okay, so let's just back up for a moment. Let's take a breath and give our friends a little bit of advice. If you're going to start a company and you're going to issue an ICO, so you're going to issue a token, right? You get to decide how many tokens you're going to issue, how the holders of the tokens are going to benefit from holding your token, whether you're throwing off some dividend payments or you get some ownership of the assets. Up to you. It's wide open. The other thing is that when you are disclosing what an owner gets, you cannot guarantee returns. Okay, that's clear. You can't say, I guarantee the holder of this token will get 20% returns the rest of their life forever. Okay, we know that's clear. The other thing is, you can't sort of lie. You can't say, I'm raising this to invest in real estate, and actually you just run away, right? That's illegal and you'll get caught, and that's what the SEC is out there trying to protect, in small investors. However, I think we have to put this in context. Who are the owners of all these Bitcoins and Ethereum? Is it the masses of people outside in America? Is it my mom, in Oklahoma? She's like, mining Bitcoin? No. It's these technological entrepreneurs who are early to the game, who mined early, and they have hundreds of millions of dollars, some even billions of dollars. It's not widespread. I mean, like, for example, I'll take a vote here. How many people own Bitcoins in the audience? Look how many people, right? And so SEC is regulating, this quote, new security that everyone's participating. No. So, we have to sort of understand, the regulators have to understand how big the scope of this problem is, right? Alternatively, the other thing that the regulators have, and I feel for the regulators too, they have two sides. They want to protect individual investors, I get it, right? But they don't want to over-regulate this market because they want innovations, because there's a lot of potential job, creation here. So, I want to sort of shift gears here for a second, because this is a sort of a future technology conference. And I'm going to start throwing out some terms here just to get the panel all excited. We've seen the first sort of Bitcoins, but there's also this generation, the second generation of coins that we don't know who's holding them or trading them, right? Like Zcash and Monero. Now, is this the next wave whereby people want to protect themselves, do these transactions, get ownership of certain assets without revealing who they are? Is that going to be the next wave of this, or do you think, you know, even that is not going to really, you know, pan out as much? Please.
Well, I think the wave's already happened.
Okay,
It's
good.
like when Monero came out in an obscured identity, you know, criminal conduct just swarmed to that, right? And so they defeated all of FinCEN and Justice's capabilities to track, you know, money laundering and bribes and, you know, payoffs and things like that. So what is the mechanism for law enforcement now to detect? At some point, they always cash out. They always go to fiat currency. So they look for that the big transactions of fiat, and that's the trigger now.
Okay, so then go ahead, please.
Two ways or two stages. I think the next stage is the concept of only because everybody wants to cash out at some point and look for fiat. The concept of stable currencies, I think, is the next wave, where the T0s of the world and the quorums of the world are starting to bridge the gap between the digital currency in the form of stable currency with the fiat currency. I think the next wave is the world is going towards digital sovereign currency. I think to me that's the next wave. Paper currency has to. Of course, Euro tried it, right, in the 90s, and they failed miserably. So they went back to paper currency. But I think the market and industry, with the advent of blockchain, I think there is a light at the end of the tunnel for digital sovereignty.
So you're in agreement with Elon Musk, who says that paper currencies we're done with that?
I think so.
Okay, interesting.
I think so. That's maybe 20 years down the future, but I think it's coming.
Okay, and now I'm going to open up this last can of worms just because it's so exciting.
Can I offer a point of view on that?
Please, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So I agree that we're probably going to have sovereign digital currencies, and I think that makes sense. By the way, T0 is insolvent, $150 million, there was nobody behind it. Patrick Byrne is going to jail.
Yep. Okay,
got it. So, you know that. I'm sorry, I'm just calling out the facts. I'm just a reporter here.
I think I'm sitting in the wrong seat.
Okay. So I think we have to recognize that one of the most important items around currency is distribution. How many people hold it? I offer this up as an opportunity to think about this. I believe that there are going to be industry coins, not just sovereign coins. Yep. So if you think about airline miles, imagine what happens when United Airlines, Lufthansa, Singapore Airways, and Qantas gets together, and maybe the Marriott, because a lot of people have Marriott points. Take all those points and turn it into the transportation coin and securitize that stuff. Over 100 million people would already hold that coin. There are not over 100 million people that own any cryptocurrency right now. The last thing I found out was about 14 million people actually hold Bitcoin. So I think there are going to be industry coins, and they're going to come from a place where you have an existing deployment of some fractional ownership of something. The issue is that most of those airlines might not want to do that because they change the rules on the coins on the points all the time. Yeah. This is why sometimes you board in the front of the line, and then 3 years after you're boarding in the back of the line. But I want you to think about that pattern when you think about value. Those frequent flyer points, and there are many other examples of this. So I do think that yes, sovereign lines are interesting and they're being blended. By the way, airlines actually started with sovereign lines, and now they're like that. And another thing for Wells Fargo was actually a horse and carriage company. To your earlier thing around banks, right? That's why their logo is actually horse and carriages. But don't misinterpret issuing a coin with distribution of the coin. The fact that the industries have distributed points already, I don't know what's stopping the airlines from doing this. Because if the airlines wanted a coin, I don't know why anybody would ever invest in Bitcoin. So I just want to add that.
No, that's a great.
I'll tell you, it's certainly not stopping sovereignties from doing this. Venezuela has issued a cryptocurrency called petrodollars or something like that, and it's supposedly backed by their oil reserves. Right. So the question, what does that mean? Like, if you had a petrodollar, can you go to the government in Venezuela and say, I'd like to redeem this for your oil reserve. So what are they going to give you, a can of crude oil or something like that? I mean, what are you going to do with that? It's worthless, basically.
Thomas, I just want to say I'm an American, but at the same time, you could ask the same question about America. I just want to park the
Absolutely.
conversation.
But
the
the
American
point is, when
dollar
you go to
is
sovereign
rolled
coins,
back, right?
it goes to the issue like what's backing
Like,
the
I can't go to the
cryptocurrency.
White House
Yeah.
right now and get gold for my dollars.
Full faith
yeah.
and credit of the United States.
Exactly. That's a very good point. So I just want to throw this out. I'm working with an alum. We're trying to tokenize real estate, and we have a property about $20–30 million backed by a really good sort of landlord, Whole Foods, right, which is ultimately Amazon, right? And the issue is we could tokenize this property. There's not a problem. You can issue a token for this property, and then sell the property and gain ownership, and the token holders will own this property. The problem is, who's going to buy this token, right? Who's going to trust that Professor Liu has wrote the right code and everything's going to work properly if you own this real estate token from Professor Liu, right? And so that's the issue, right? It's not tokenizing a piece of asset or even a security. You can do it. The technology exists, but the credibility to sort of be there and say, I'm going to fulfill the obligations, whatever I told you about this token, that's still sort of questionable right now in terms of the demand for buying these tokens, right? The technology is there to tokenize everything in the world, but the buyer of that token or the holder of the token, it's not quite there. Everyone's just sort of looking around. Now, I'm going to shift a little bit here. Yeah, go ahead, please.
That's true for every IPO. I mean, Lyft went out there and it had so much hype that's why people bought it and it went up to 85. But that's true of every IPO.
Okay. That's a fair point.
That's why the pre-sale and the hyping and things like that, they're regulated.
So two more things and then we're going to be done here. One thing I have to ask is, what's going to happen when we have quantum computers, the current sort of blockchain security infrastructure. Most of it's secured by a SHA-256, was created by our friends at the NSA. That's industrial grade cryptography. But once we have quantum computers, that is not going to be enough. So, what are your thoughts here? We heard this morning that Marianne said that NSA is working on some other types of algorithms to be resistant to quantum computers. I mean, what are your thoughts there? Are you guys thinking about that, or is that too far off the horizon?
So last year, when I was at RSA, I met with several, so we got Quantum Poly, right, in Canada. So I met with 5 or 6 quantum computing companies that are already working hand in hand and briefing the DoD. And what it was a real eye-opener for me, and what they told me was that quantum computing is going to weaken SHA-256 by a minimum of 50%. And it is on the horizon. I mean, it is happening maybe next 10 years. So I don't have a solution. That's what they told me. Yeah.
So it's interesting, just to not directly addressing the quantum computing paradigm per se, but SHA-256 is probably, if you look at guard time, they use SHA-512, right? So there's SHA-1024 also in the market now, but they're just the most secure thing today, but maybe 10 years from now, they may not be the most secure because there's going to be somebody who's going to come and break it. So what's going to happen then, right? So, which is kind of where, I bring it back to blockchain, right? Which is kind of where it's not just the SHA-256 or 512 or 1024. It's not just that's making it secure. Right? It's a combination of that with you break that one character with the 256-bit character set, you break the entire chain. That's kind of what makes it powerful.
Yeah. So so my understanding is basically all of these algorithms, the secure hash algorithms, are basically 256. And there's a company in Scottsdale, Arizona called Nexus, and they actually have a coin that trades that is actually developing the 1024 secure hash algorithm. So I think it's kind of like breaking into your house. You can't really stop somebody from breaking into your house. If they have enough time, they're going to break into your house no matter how many metal doors and locks you have. But how long does it take? So the 1024 is going to make it a lot more secure, at least by today's standards. So You know, I'm just kind of curious, people know the Schrodinger cat thought experiment? Do people know that? Oh, Erwin Schrodinger was a physicist? All right, so you know the cat is a dead or alive, that whole thing, right? So that's what the quantum computer is doing. All these computers are based on binaries, 1 and 0s, right? The classical computers say that that bit is either 1 or 0. Quantum computers says it's both 1 and 0 at the same time. So it's a superposition of all the states, in this case just 2 states. So now if you have 50 of these quantum bits, in your classical computer you have 50 bits. In a quantum computer you have 2 to the 50th power, right? Because it's just counting them up, it's not hard to do. Put 2 to the 50th, or even 2 to the 10th power in your iPhone and see what kind of number you get. So the way these things work, they run in the quantum state to do all the computing. And then when you want the answer, you look at it, and then it defaults to the current state, kind of like the cat now is either dead or alive. They're making amazing progress, and the competition with China. This is a war right now with China to develop these. In fact, I just did a paper that's coming out in the next day or two. It might be out now. Actually, with one of my former students, Zhenxi Liu. She's standing in the back here.
Is it public? Is it public?
Thank you, Professor.
A couple other students. Raise your hands if you have any other students here. Raise your hands. About how China, they have really brought a lot of their technology to the United States. But now there's so much suspicion about Chinese technology and infiltrating our infrastructure. They're taking it back to China. And we did an article about a company called Qihu 360 that was publicly traded on the New York Exchange. They went private, then they took it back to China, and through a reverse merger, took it public in China. And the goal, according to our paper, is that they want to build a cybersecurity company in China on Chinese soil to be, for example, an Alibaba, but for cybersecurity. So this is what's happening, and actually, like a copy of the paper, you can slip me a card and write give her a card and write article. I'll send you a copy of it.
So I want to. This is very fascinating, very interesting. There's a global race for many different things. You know, AI superiority, how to use the blockchains, and quantum computers, which is very interesting. I want everyone to have sort of the final word. So either give us a warning about the future or your vision about the future. What do you think is going to happen? And it may be that this whole blockchain is actually all just hype, right? And we got all excited for nothing. But let's think about AI. Is AI hype? No, it's baked into everything that we do right now, right? What about the cloud? Was the cloud hype? No, people are moving to the cloud because it's beneficial, right? So I'd like to just go down the line and give everybody a chance to give us their last words, and then we'll wrap this up. Who wants to start?
I will.
You're not part of the panel? Wait, we'll open up for questions. And you can,
Oh, no. I was going to, you're
yeah.
going to open it.
They're just going to do the last words, and then we'll open up for questions.
Tell us which order you want us.
Whatever you guys want. Whoever's ready. Whoever wants to.
We'll start with Thomas.
Thomas, go ahead. Professor?
Well, thank you. Look, my view is it's going to happen. You're not going to stop this. It may not look tomorrow the way it looks today. It's evolving. People are struggling to figure this out, find a niche for cryptocurrencies, STOs, the whole thing. It's gonna happen in some form or another. The big questions are not, in my mind, not the technology questions, but the values that are built into the technology. Who is going to make those decisions? We see that issue today with Google and Facebook, and who's going to decide what to post on Facebook? Do you want Facebook to decide First Amendment issues? Do you want companies? Do you want governments? If they're governments, do you want Western democracies? Do you want Middle East governments? Do you want a North Korea to make those decisions? To me, this technology is going to happen. You can't stop it. And personally, I would not necessarily trust human judgment to put the checks and balances to make this happen. There are lots of human emotions: greed, money, power. These are things that motivate people, not always. And then you have religions who believe people are willing to die because there's a better universe on the other side. So let's exterminate the human race. you know, it's going to happen, but who's going to make these decisions and the values they embed in this technology? To me, that is the single most important question we have to address.
So I also agree with the professor that it is going to happen. And I also want to kind of take a little bit further than what the professor said in the things that to watch out for category is that's where I've been going in the recent past with my blockchain experiences governance. Richie talked about the concept of a consensus mechanism and the concept of people making decisions on what can happen to the data. So you almost have to start there. Before technology is simple, blockchain technology is going to be very simple. There's a lot of things that are coming up. So you pretty much have to start at the governance. And even before that, you have to ask yourself the question, oh, I have to share? If so, what do I have to share? Why do I have to share? And what are the rules that govern what I share? I think that's where we start. But I think it's going to happen.
So I would say that, you know, most people are intimidated by emerging technology, not just blockchain, but all the emerging technologies that we've talked about today, including, you know, quantum computing, AI, RPA. Obviously, people in this room are kind of leaning forward, right? And so I would urge you to, you know, kind of try to be an ambassador, not necessarily hyping the technology, but making sure that people understand that it is absolutely coming. There will be winners and there will be losers. And so we've seen this with the manufacturing industry where people were unprepared and it's led to a lot of unrest. So I would encourage you to talk about it as much as you can, just so with other people and people in your ecosystem and community, so that you know, they can try to stay on the right side of history.
I agree with everything. I would say that when we had to make policy decisions or draw lines of behavior around the internet, the implications were market implications. They were not social implications. They were not democratic implications. And now we're 20 years in the future. We realize that the internet actually had social and democratic components to it, yes, and that we should have probably taken a breath and thought a little bit more clearly about how we legislate the internet. And legislate not in a negative sense, like in the positive sense. People tend to think about the word legislate as a negative word. I think we're at a critical juncture in history because we see a fast, mass adopting technology that for the first time in the history of our species has social and democratic implications. And this is no longer just a market implication. So with the internet, kind of like in hindsight, we figured out that there was some social democratic issues at bay. We know that with blockchain and quantum computing, there are social, and artificial intelligence, by the way, there are social democratic issues at play. And so I would encourage here that we be thoughtful about how we invest, how we legislate, and the pace at which we go forward. I think this is one of the very careful moments in history, other than the Industrial Revolution, when we had to think about worker safety and chemicals and all that kind of stuff, where government has an active role in the first scene of the movie. And I'm glad that we're here for that. Thank you very much.
Jim stepped out, so let me just take a few minutes for questions and see what kind of response we get. I know you wanted to say something.
Well, actually, what I was going to say is just what you said, and that is, you know, when you're first developing a lot of this technology, there are a lot of positive uses that will come out on an individual and on a group or societal kind of a basis. But as it gets bigger and bigger and more used, the characteristics of that start to change. and you can see more bad than you can good, and that's where the embedded values really become critical. And because in the past, like with the internet, you know, it took longer for technology to develop. Now, the length of time for technology can be just a few years away. You know, 10 years is a very short period of time. And so the social implications, I think, that we have to address in a positive way have to go along with the development, even at its earliest phases. So I'm beginning to feel very strongly about that.
The fact is, we really don't know where this is going to
We
go.
don't. We really don't know what it looks
like
like.
Richie's saying, I'll confess, I never saw the power of Facebook.
No.
I never saw that.
Yeah.
And when the internet came out, I don't think people saw the power of this, right? So
Yeah.
it's going to happen. We don't quite know how it's going to go. Yeah.
Now we know.
So I have two questions. One's for you, Thomas, and the other one's for Richie. So the first one, well, I'll go to Richie first. You spoke about potentially one use case being the travel industry tokenizing things. When we're looking at identity or authentication, what about the banking industry? Because that's one place where, true, we're talking about the United States here, we're not talking about necessarily developing a world where they don't have banks, but where people are already registered.
Yeah. So just to understand the question, from a travel industry jumping to the financial services industry, are you referencing the JP Morgan coin, or are you talking about identity for the unbanked?
Well, I'm first talking about establishing identity and then going perhaps even to its own coin. Because you opened up my mind to the concept that you could have a travel coin.
Yeah.
And that coin could have value to people who only want to travel and they trade it and use it for other things. So you already established with the bank industry that so many people in the United States at least who have accounts and therefore are authenticated by those banks already.
Yeah. So I definitely think, and if I think my chart was up earlier, I think identity is the battleground. I don't think currency is the battleground. I think identity is where the battleground is. And I think this is going to be fascinating. From the unbanked perspective, there's Sovereign, there's Everest, there's Evonim, there's a whole bunch of other companies that are doing identity without having government as an intermediate, right? One of the things that we don't realize is that the Passport Office and the Department of Motor Vehicles are fantastic intermediaries for identity, right? So this notion of decentralized identity comes with both promise and outcry, right? Like, you know, some countries in the world, you know, like I grew up in a very, very, very poor country in South America, you know, like I'm pretty sure there are 5 people in the same town with the same name, right? So there's stuff like that we have to be careful about. What I find interesting, though, is that the entire blockchain community is so fascinated by currency, as if currency is the biggest invention of the world, not realizing that credit is actually the biggest invention in the financial markets. And I think what is interesting here is the tokenization of one's inherent value, whether it be data or your identity or your earning capacities, think credit unions. I think that to be able to tokenize one's net worth and then have credit on top of that is what's going to bring the last 2 billion forward. Right? And I think this is very interesting because the last 2 billion are not marketed to. They're not in the digital economies. These are people that have massive potential spend if we bring them online. So again, these are very macroeconomic course corrective actions that I'm looking at. I come from a place of thinking about history to try to predict the future. So I'm probably arcing a little far out. But keep in mind that currency is not that interesting. Credit is actually the star of the show.
Yeah, I like that. And Thomas, I wanted to get away from securities because can you not tokenize, let's say, because we often talk about supply chains. And so you can tokenize an asset in a supply chain so that much like the Accelerate model, you can have things that are, well, we call it tokenized, but not for the purpose, yes, I'm sorry, I'm thinking this through as I go along.
Fractionalizing.
Well, no, I wasn't even going to go that way, Richie. I'll take software, for instance. So with software, I can use the ISO 19770. I could go to part 3, and if I went and did that, I know what I could go off-chain with what my entitlements are, and if my entitlements allow me to take the software from you who no longer needs it because you're no longer working for me, now Richie's working for me, and I move that software over to him, that is still a token, but it's not used in the same in the same type of market. I was wondering what your thoughts are to that type of application of
I don't know what my thoughts are. That's kind of an interesting question, because I don't think I've quite run into it quite the way you've described that. I mean, if...
That's what Sandy does to you.
Pardon? So, I mean, if the Howey test, all right, let me step back. So if you look at the 1933 Security Act, there's a definition of the term security. And it's a long laundry list of financial instruments, right? One of the terms in there is investment contract. So the Supreme Court interpreted what that term means in the 1946 case, the Howey case. And it's pretty well popularized in discussions. That is a test that the SEC uses to determine whether these ICOs are securities, and it's a 4-pronged test. So if you're, and I can't articulate what they are exactly right now, but basically, you know, if you're projecting or selling a revenue stream, and the success of the revenue stream is under your control, and the success, you know, and all this kind of thing, then they will treat it as a security. And the chairman has said every ICO they've seen satisfies the Howey test. Now, if you flunk just one element of the Howey test, then you will not be a security. So what's the method to do that? Well, you can look at the 4 tests, and actually I have tables like this in my course materials. My students look at it. But you know, the kind of rule of thumb is if you make it look more like a currency as opposed to a security, then it won't be a security. So Bitcoin, in my opinion, has never been a security. Ethereum was a security when they issued it, and they raised $150 million. But the SEC came out, we're not going to treat it as a security. Now, for lots of good policy reasons, because among other things, it's now evolved into something else, right? And we don't want to penalize them when we didn't even know what anybody was doing back in 2014, whatever it was. So I don't know, that I'd be interested to maybe discuss this a little bit further, but those are some kind of initial thoughts. Anybody else? Yeah.
One more interesting question, I guess, and that is, does anybody worry, and coming at it from a very positive perspective, does anybody worry about the technology moving forward so fast and creating so many opportunities for a group of people that a lot of people are suddenly left behind? And the people that are left behind, I guess this gets to what you were talking about a little bit earlier, the people who get left behind end up having less and less authority or power to maneuver in the system unless the technology itself creates greater intuitiveness and simplification for the people to be able to use. That's a real broad-based kind of a question, but I am interested in reactions related to that.
I worry about that 24/7, 365. So, you know, there are many topics around this. I will tell you though that I grew up in the internet age. So, you know, by 16 I was hacking already. I will say that with blockchain, there are more of the underserved, unprivileged community that is involved than what I've seen with the internet. Now, I didn't live through the electricity.
And that's what I mean by the positive aspect.
Yeah, I didn't live through the electricity and the printing press and all that kind of stuff. So more individuals from third world countries, more people of color, more females are definitely involved in blockchain more than what I saw with the internet. So I think that's a positive. But you've hit the nail right on the head. It's the speed at which this thing is moving. And we are going to make mistakes. There are going to be mistakes in blockchain because of the pace at which we're moving. What I worry about is the power balance around the resource, right? So at the end of the day, what fuels artificial intelligence? Data. What fuels markets? Data, right? In many ways, what fuels government intelligence? Data, right? I can't think of an industry right now that is not fueled by data. Man, I have a pet shop in my town that is like using census data to figure out where to drop flyers. Seriously, I'm not making this stuff up. I live in Sparta, New Jersey. I'm happy to introduce you to the pet shop owner, right? And that the use of data is creating value for large corporations. I think data to be used for government, assuming that governments intend to do good, we should carve that out for the commons, right? We have to have a commons market. Even in intellectual property, we have commons market. In labor, we have commons as well. Volunteer organizations are labor commons, right? I think we have to carve out labor for the commons. But I think this idea of data being the fuel of the economy, this is where the imbalance is, right? This is where I worry about the most. And the speed, to be honest, I have a hypothesis, and I've got capital against an organization that's building a movement. You know what? We may fail spectacularly, but hopefully we inspire somebody else to solve the problem.
So while I'm worried about the speed with which the blockchain technology is moving forward, which by failures we learn. So because we have history in other concepts where we learn by failure. I'm actually excited about the fact that a lot of solutions that are coming out in the market are actually focusing on social good solutions.
I think that's critical.
Yeah,
I mean, to embed that type of a value into the outcomes right from the start seems really important.
A simple example.
But it will change over time. This is what I worry
That's
about.
right. It's not, the question is will speed outdo?
Yeah, like Google started out not doing Evo, like it was in the lobby, right? So we just got to be careful because it's moving so fast and it has such implications. Even a company with good posture, greed is an amazing thing.
Well, if you ask Google, they'll say it's my definition of not doing Evo versus somebody else does. But Manchester, the city of Manchester, for example, they're
Liverpool. Sorry, I'm a Liverpool diehard fan.
Sorry, can't bring up Manchester without mentioning Liverpool.
Oh, okay. Or Tottenham.
Sorry.
Or Tottenham.
They're not worth anything either.
I'm not talking about the Manchester City team.
He's kidding.
But I am talking about the Manchester United team, which I enjoy watching. But anyway, so City of Manchester, their food stamps, so what they call as food stamps is now on a blockchain where these whatever city issues, the money city issues for the people who the food stamps so the credit card concept is on blockchain, and they have an app. The money shows up on a Friday evening from the government, Manchester City. They can, on Saturday when the banks are closed, they can go to a store and pay for their groceries using the money that the government gave the previous day. World Bank is looking at the concept of diaspora, so the refugees, that concept. Refugees one side, another side. It's a very interesting concept where companies are now thinking about, hey, we'll offer travel insurance for Asian diaspora or Indian diaspora or Haitian diaspora in this country, where in return the money that we collect from you can be used to provide for health insurance for one of your relatives or family members that you specify in that country on a blockchain. So there's a lot of the state governments and local governments are looking at recycling and helping with tokenization of that business, where the more water bottles, the more steel or non-plastic bottles that you use, you get rewards for using more of recyclable water containers, and that rewards can in return be paid. You can pay for your water usage. There are many such social good concepts are coming up because of the advent of blockchain.
So if I just add a couple of quick comments, and then I think we'll call it a day. I see this blockchain issue a little differently than, for example, the internet issue.
The internet and cell phones required physical things, right? You had to have a cell phone, you had to have a computer, you had to have internet. So there was a physical barrier for people to participate in that kind of technological revolution. My view is I think the blockchain is more of an issue for corporate government entities and whether or not they adopt it. And it will run silently in the background to improve efficiencies and speed and reliability. But the people themselves will see the benefits of it. But I'm not so sure you have to actually buy into it like you had to buy a cell phone or a laptop or get internet. So that's one thought to think about. The other thought is that there will always be people who are hesitant to jump onto something new. So just take tokenization of real estate assets. This is really kind of a great concept that's really exciting and enhances access to capital markets. But I promise you there are people out there who will not do it. And they'll just sit there and they won't touch it. I'm not doing it, I know what I know. So if they're not creative and if they're not into change, they won't get into it until finally it's all over the news. And FOMO, the fear of missing out. That's like a lot of, I better get into it. Oh, I better buy Bitcoin at 15,000 or 19,000, now I'm missing out. So I think you'll see some of that. But the people who are flexible and willing to change, they'll get into it. Okay, any last quick comments? Otherwise, I think we'll call it a day.
I hope there's lunch.
Yeah. I hope there's And this has really been great. Thank you so much to everybody. Great questions. Nice meeting you.
Absolutely. But can we eat first?
I just have to eat.
I'll probably get No, I like your question.
My Wi-Fi died. How's it going? Now to wait on ads. There's so much battery usage that I go through on these things that sometimes I don't keep up. My cameras have been dying, my batteries have been dying. We're getting there. Yeah, one second thing.
Like, I'm not walking around going, this is the future. So I appreciate you. I think sorry, yeah, it gets a little complex here. There are more questions than answers. Yeah, absolutely. There are more questions than answers, particularly the issue around the commons, right? Because data is used for good for the commons.
You're so right about big data and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, all right.
Yes, give me you send me an email. Okay.
Can I just ask you a quick question for my chat?
Yeah.
One person wanted to know, is there a link between the amount of cryptocurrency and the price of energy? And if so, if power becomes demonetized someday, like how would that affect us?
I appreciate that.
Okay, do you have the question written down?
Oh, it's yeah, sure.
It's a pretty long question.
Okay. It's this one, right? So the person, I guess, is
Yeah. So in the sense that, and I'll just explain it, and then I don't know if you. Oh, you're.
Yeah, it is. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Yes. Hi. This is us.
Okay, so somebody here has asked a question about the power energy supply. So for example, in the think about Argentina, you think about other places where, you know, basically the price of power has, is pretty much sponsored by the state, sponsored by the government. So a lot of people are moving their operations, or cryptocurrency and mining rigs and all these operations down to these countries where, you know, basically the cost of power is nothing. Number one, you know, that's basically arbitrage, right? So you're taking arbitrage, you're basically trying to arbitrage in order to get more, you know, mining and get more currency and things like that. So yeah, it's gonna, just like anything else with supply and demand, the more people that move down to Argentina and wherever else and keep on mining and mining for less money, then yeah, it's definitely going to affect, you know, the demand, right? There's gonna be increased demand, and then it's, you know, it's a lot cheaper, so yeah.
And thank you so much. I know you're hungry. Go.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, thank you very much for everything.
All
That
right.
was awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Saint, did you hear that? I think I got your question asked. I don't know if that helped you out at all. No problem. Thank you guys for being in here. I'm not really gonna turn the stream off per se. I'm probably just gonna leave it chilling here while I go get something to eat. Go to the bathroom, charge some batteries, freshen up. I look horrible. I need to sleep. I haven't slept in like a day or two. Got some bags under my eyes and I'm pale. Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? Should I turn the stream off and then just turn it back on later, or what do you guys think is what's best for me to do here? I could just leave it up, or I could take it down, but I really have to go to the bathroom. So I guess for now it's just gonna be left up. How long till the next panel or lecture? I don't know, because we're so far behind schedule. This one was supposed to be over at noon, I think. Yeah, so everything got really changed. There's probably other panels going on right now. I'm just gonna really go to the bathroom, get myself like some water, and then I'll be back in just like a couple of minutes. So I don't know. I don't think it's gonna be more than like 10 or 15 minutes until I can find another panel. Is anybody out there having a good time? Are you guys like, are you enjoying what's going on? Leave a message for me. I'll stop back and I'll see you soon.
Läksin seda, vaata siis, kui ma istusin seal all, enne seda just panin lauale ja läksin järelikult vaatama mingi tund aega hiljem juba. Kui ei olegi enam vaatama. See on kõik ära? Ise autos pole siis see lõppi lõpuks halvemaks, siis neid võetakse aega. Need võetakse kohe ära. Aga lihtsalt, kui ma automas on jäänud, sa nüüd sellest räägid. Ei, mul on neid mida me võime teha, ma praegu otsin seda, kas need olid meil voltitud ühepoolselt, ei saa taha. Ei, need on sellised nagu näiteks ma võin selle kokku ka välja vahele trükkida ja varsti siin ja siis saame sinna vahele siis on nagu võtnud vaadata pildile nagu juures 5G saab kõike vaata see on nagu see korraliselt poole mõtled, et tahkisi üritavad ära parandada meid ja naine. Ma saan tänu praegu tegelikult küll üks, et on juba lisamunud juba siin. No täpselt, jah. Aga kell on juba 2. Pool 2. Kõik on Mihkas, need läksid praegu siin sööma kõik. Aga need ei ole enam need inimesed. Need on see... Hästi käenud, siis keegi nagu peaks korraldama, et piiri lähtava kõik on sõbet. Nii lastas iga ühe nii, et on iga taga. Ka meil selles mõttes ka nii. Oli ikka 2. Oli 3. Õhtul on mingi vendi kutt. Ja meil ei ole, mul ei ole küll saadud. Ei viitsiks just nii. Aga nüüd on teha nagu. Hommikul on nüüd jälle ära. ütlesin, et ei ole vaja. Meil on mitu tükki, ma mõtlesin, et võtaks paar seda Life in Estoniat kaasa, et neid oleks hea võib-olla anda, et seal on päris mitu seda teemat. See on endast kõik. Väga lumet muidugi, et teemad sees.
Awesome. Good to hear. Good to hear. Good to hear. It's so cold in here. Very cold. I've been shivering. All right. So I guess the next one that is supposed to be up is called Innovation and Future of Economy. It's going to be with Andrew Iancu, Undersecretary for Commerce and Director of USPTO. That was supposed to start at 1 p.m. So, I'm not sure what happened with the other tracks. Oh, wait, is this, Does anyone know if the next lecture is back at the main room?
Don't know, frankly.
Because I'm just looking, so it says track 1, track 2, and track 3 all have the same conference at 1300 EST.
Yes, so I think it was just one speaker for that time slot.
Did that happen back in the...
But I don't know.
Don't know if it happened yet? Yeah.
Because everybody was going in that room, but I didn't go. So
Okay.
yeah, so it's just confusing where we're at in the schedule.
Yeah, so up next might be empowering digital innovation into the fast lane. Does anybody...
That's what I'm hoping.
Okay. And that would be like 10 minutes behind for right now, right?
Yeah.
It probably is lagging, Mammoth. It probably is. Just give me a minute. I'm gonna... I need more electricity, frankly. Sorry, Mammoth, just give me a second. Buddy. Now it should be better. Now that I plug my phone in, it can be better. Alright, so rundown of the rest of the day too. I'll be here until 6 p.m. I'm going to do some networking, and then I'm going to try to run over to the Lincoln Memorial tonight. I'm doing a podcast with the Doghouse at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So let's hope I have enough energy to get to there. This has been a very long day. How are you doing?
Hey, how are you? I'm
Good.
supposed to speak.
Oh, hi.
That's me right there.
Okay. How are you doing, Mr. Bellacci?
Bellacci.
Bellacci.
Yeah.
Welcome.
How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm like a live streamer.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
So I try to like broadcast like different events like this, that way people can like talk about it.
Outstanding, that's great.
We had 10 people in here at one point, which is like, I'm new, I started in February, but it's getting there.
Awesome.
So
That's great. So as far as getting the display to work and everything else, who do we talk to?
oh my gosh. What are you going to be putting up?
There were a couple of slides that we can talk to.
Do you have it on your PC?
Yeah.
I know that what they did is for some people, they just have them use this HDMI.
Okay.
So, I mean, you could probably use turn that on, and then output your HDMI. Do you need a Thunderbolt swap?
Yeah.
I don't have Thunderbolt.
check.
Yeah, I'm not a Mac guy.
Don't judge.
I'm actually not affiliated with this at all. I'm just an independent person. So it's okay. So you're going to be talking about digital innovation fasting. Interesting. I actually just took a 9 axes test to kind of like determine like my philosophy and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I was more on the side of tradition than progress in science, which I kind of like surprised myself on it. I have started to get a little bit leery of which entities are going to be gaining the most power from kind of technological advances, and like if it's going to be shared or distributed evenly.
Yeah. So the area I work in is automotive, specifically autonomous vehicles.
Okay, well,
automating.
I'm 100% with you there. I think it should be done.
So that's really what the session is about.
Awesome. So our next session is going to be about autonomous vehicles, guys. It is a little bit, it's a little bit strange to me that there's so much pushback against it. We just
safety, right?
Yeah, we just watched the Volvo garbage truck video with my chat like pretty recently.
Okay.
My stepfather was a garbage truck driver, so he thought that that was I'm sure you're familiar with the program that they're working on. But yeah, there's some definitely good uses for autonomous vehicles, and in theory it should be safer than tired people driving.
One would certainly hope. Let's see here.
That is all of their stuff.
That's their stuff?
Yes.
Okay. Tell you what, let's do this.
Yeah, that I have no. I know that they're doing some kind of live stream or something, so I'm not sure. If you have it, what one person did is they sent something to me and they ran their PowerPoint off of my PC. You're welcome to do that if you want to. You can send me like the email and then you could HDMI through that way potentially, but that's the only other thing I can come up with. I need to eat a little bit.
positiivne, kui teha midagi.
Mis programmi me need teeme?
Soomlastele, nemad nendel on ainult tund aega, sest nendel ei olegi muud kui ettekanne ja võib-olla
Oh, they gave us fruit. Raspberry, look at all this. Mm. So good. So good. I was so hungry. So the next two conferences are about autonomous driving. Yeah. Mammoth, the next two are going to be about it. So the first one is empowering digital innovation into the fast lane. The next one is learning in the early days of autonomous mobility, global trends. Then it's the future of mobility, how can policy accelerate change and motion. We have a coffee break, and then there's another big panel once again. Then there's some future of space, new frontiers, near-term future of tech in aerospace and defense, IPv6, and future of intent. And then a panel discussion supposedly at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on future of technology and government panel. And that has the U.S. Air Force CTO, wow, Chief Technology Officer of Microsoft National Intelligence, Chief Technology Officer of Attain, Government Executive and IPv6 expert, and a technology consultant leader. So there should be some good stuff coming ahead. If you ever want to change the stream title Mammoth and like make it something a little bit, I guess like more likely that people will come in, you knock yourself out or whatever. I was kind of hoping a few more people would kind of pop in throughout the day, but that's all right. We'll keep trying. It does surprise me a little bit. Like with me being one of the ones inside like the political streamers that actually does like news broadcasting, that more people don't come over this way at times. It is it like gets a little bit disheartening, I guess, but I got my boys here and I got the people here that care about this, so it's good to be able to keep doing it. This one just took it was difficult for me to get here. I had to take my transportation to Washington, D.C. It took me like 10.5 hours. And then I was in D.C. for like 3.5 hours before the conference doors opened, so I just had to kind of like walk around. Actually, I took a little bit of a nap outside. I kind of just, I put my bags down, I laid down on my bags, I just like cuddled up and I slept outside of the venue for a little while. Maybe like 45 minutes until I like panic woke up. I didn't feel like getting into DC at 2:45, walking to a hotel, paying for a hotel, waking up at 6 a.m., coming to the conference, and yeah. Any luck?
Yeah, it's on the way.
There you go. Yeah, I think they're behind a little bit, so.
Yeah.